Chapter 758. The dragon boat in front of him was tall and ancient-looking, entirely green in color, as if it was carved out of a piece of wood that was 1,000 feet long and hundreds of feet wide. The dragon boat, which had originally been exquisitely carved, was now riddled with dozens of holes of varying sizes. The dragon head was missing in half, and the dragon tail was completely broken off. The roof of the cabin in the middle of the dragon boat had also been blown off, revealing the tables and praying mats and other items inside. However, all of the items were almost completely rotten. The man standing at the bow of the ship was 9 feet tall. His crimson robe was basically intact, but there was a very thin mark on his chest. Clearly, some kind of attack had pierced through this robe, which was embroidered with dozens of fire crows flying in the air. As for the man's body and face, Wu Qi only gave him a glance, then immediately turned his head away. All that was left of the man was a golden-purple skeleton. The dense innate ghost energy and some kind of unknown energy merged together, covering his skeleton with a layer of translucent muscles, barely forming a blurry facial features. In his deep, dark eye sockets, 2 faint red lights flashed, filled with an air of brutality and madness. This was not a man, but an ancient immortal who had fallen in the ghost realm many years ago, and had been infected by innate ghost energy and turned into a ghost. The 13 great heavenly ghost kings of the ghost realm had the same origin as him. They were all ancient almighty experts who had fallen, and after being soaked in innate ghost energy for countless eons, they had evolved into ghost bodies. As for the 400 ghost saints, more than half of them had the same origin, and only a small portion of them were ghost saints who were born and bred in the heavenly ghost realm. Accompanied by a fierce murderous aura, the dragon boat came before Wu Qi in a flash, slashing down toward Wu Qi with a long, serrated sword. Wu Qi snorted coldly. With a flick of his sleeve, he dodged the slash of the sword like a loach. With a wave of his right hand, the flying ship was sucked into his interstitial world by a beam of chaotic light that shot out of his palm. At the same time, a deafening rumble rang out from his interstitial world, causing Huang Liang and the others to fall into a deep coma. Then he cast a soul-shaking curse on each of them, preventing them from waking up naturally for at least a month. After packing up Huang Liang and his companions, Wu Qi gently waved his fingers and sent all the members of Heavenly Ghost Clan he had subdued into his interstitial world. Just like Huang Liang and the others, before they entered the interstitial world, all the heavenly ghosts were knocked out by him, and each of them was given a soul-shaking spell. The sword brushed past Wu Qi's body, its edge tearing through the air and bringing up a cold breeze. The robe Wu Qi was wearing was just an ordinary one, so when the sword swept across it, his clothes were ripped to shreds in an instant, revealing his strong, tanned, and youthful body. The red gleam in the ancient immortal's eyes grew even brighter. With great difficulty, he opened his mouth and growled in a low voice, "Blood, meat, eat." The sword gleamed coldly, and the dragon boat drew a large circle in the air, then came smashing down toward Wu Qi. Wu Qi snorted coldly and locked his hands into an incantation gesture. Immediately, the surrounding innate ghost energy surged over and condensed into a Yin thunderbolt in his palm. Then he casually released the thunderbolt, which was the size of a wicker basket, and shot toward the dragon boat at top speed, trailing a long trail of black smoke behind it. A deep, muffled boom rang out, and the dragon boat, which was already completely decayed, shattered to pieces. The ancient immortal, who had no consciousness to protect himself, was thrown dozens of miles away by the thunderbolt. The horse-slaying sword in his hand spun rapidly and flew out of his hand. After flying for over 100 miles, it easily stabbed into a towering mountain like a hot knife through butter. Wu Qi was taken aback. The horse-slaying sword was ridiculously long, and its shape was very strange. It looked like a red, twisted centipede with serrated teeth. Despite its ugly shape, it was so sharp, and it did not emit any energy fluctuation. Obviously, it was also a rare and extraordinary treasure. Without saying a word, Wu Qi sped towards the place where the sword fell. With a blink of his body, he came to the side of the lofty mountain and gave it a heavy punch. A loud boom rang out as half of the mountain was blown to pieces. The horse-slaying sword, which was shaped like a centipede and covered with serrated teeth, was twisting and leaping among the rocks like a living creature, about to soar into the sky. Without saying a word, Wu Qi punched the hilt of the sword, then casually formed 36 sealing runes and branded them on the sword. Amidst a sonorous sword cry, the sealing runes Wu Qi had formed in a hurry were torn to pieces by a casual shake of the sword. An incredibly fierce sword intent swept out from a slanted angle, cutting a fine line of blood on Wu Qi's hand. Blood dripped down from his hand. Instead of feeling angry, Wu Qi was overjoyed, and he burst into a loud laughter. As he had cultivated the true body of heaven and earth scripture, dragon transformation script, and dragon kill, the strength of his fleshly body had reached an incredible level. Although he was only a peak-level 5th-tier gold immortal, the actual strength of his fleshly body was comparable to an ordinary 2nd-tier gold immortal who specialized in body tempering. The sword was not controlled by anyone, and it was able to hurt his fleshly body with just a wisp of sword intent. Clearly, it was an extremely rare ancient artifact. Come to think of it, all the immortals who had fallen on this fragment of Pangu continent, which eventually evolved into the Ghost Realm, were famous figures in the ancient times. If they were not the supreme almighty experts of that time, they would not have been able to shatter Pangu continent, and eventually let a huge fragment drift into the outer heavenly realms, where it eventually merged with the first wisp of innate ghost energy after the primal chaos was created, and evolved into the Ghost Realm. Furthermore, after going through countless eons, they still retained their spirituality, and after being nourished by the innate ghost energy, they could transform into ghost bodies and be reborn again. Furthermore, they were the ones with the highest cultivation base among them, so how could their weapons be weak? It was said that the more powerful the ancient experts who had fallen in the 9th Nether Ghost Realm were, the later they would be reborn. Just like the 13 great heavenly ghost kings, the few with the strongest cultivation were the last to be reborn as ghosts from the state of corpses. In other words, the ancient immortal Wu Qi had met was stronger than the 13 great heavenly ghost kings when they were alive, and his overall strength would definitely surpass them in the future. Wonderful! Are you here to give me a treasure? Wu Qi roared with laughter. His fingers moved rapidly, and in the blink of an eye, 3,600 restrictive runes poured out like a stream of water. The dark Een celestial tower flashed over his head, and the horse-slaying sword also disappeared without a trace. He had used the celestial array inside the dark Een celestial tower and the 3,600 restraining runes to suppress this oddly shaped sword. No matter how powerful it was under the suppression of the law of time, it could no longer do anything. When Wu Qi had the time, he would refine it. Such a sharp treasure was extremely rare, and it could cut Wu Qi's fleshly body. In other words, it could easily tear apart an upper-grade gold immortal artifact. What kind of power did it have? Wu Qi was laughing so hard that his mouth was crooked. Just as he was feeling proud of himself, a great force came at him from behind. The ancient immortal had pounced at Wu Qi from behind, pounced on Wu Qi like a country bumpkin, and opened his mouth to bite Wu Qi's neck. Wu Qi was taken aback. Hastily, he grabbed the man's neck with a backhand and pulled him off from behind, throwing him heavily to the ground. Wu Qi had used all his strength in this attack. The brute force he had now was enough to crush a star, and coupled with the magical power in his body, the divine power was even more earth-shattering. The ancient immortal gave a muffled snort, and his robe was torn to shreds by the huge shockwave. He hit the ground like a meteor, causing the ground around him to tremble violently. Large tracts of rocks were twisted and shattered by the shockwave, and the hills and ridges within 1,000 miles were dislocated and shattered. The power of Wu Qi's attack was so great that it had caused great damage to this part of the world. But the immortal sprung to his feet as if nothing had happened to him. He spread his arms and rushed toward Wu Qi, roaring at the top of his lungs. Like a madman, he threw his arms around Wu Qi, his eyes flickering with a red flame, while waves of complicated and messy spiritual energy rushed toward Wu Qi. Carefully, Wu Qi dodged the immortal's attacks and knocked him to the ground again and again. At the same time, he carefully received the psychic waves from the immortal, and from them, he figured out the man's background. This ancient immortal had been reborn and awakened 300 years ago, but his intelligence had dissipated. He was like a real proto-sky ghost, acting purely on instinct. For the past 300 years, he had wandered around this region millions of miles in circumference, hunting prey that he was interested in. He was not very interested in those sky ghosts and primitive sky ghosts, so he did not attack the natives of the ghost realm. What he liked most was the flesh and blood of living creatures. Over the past 300 years, he had killed some immortals who came to the ghost realm for some unknown reason and sucked all their blood essence dry. These days, he was drifting casually in the river when he smelled the rich aroma of flesh and blood emanating from Wu Qi, Huang Liang, and the others. That was why he hurried here to have a feast. What kind of nose is that? How can you smell us from hundreds of miles away? Annoyed, Wu Qi grabbed the immortal's head and punched it dozens of times with all his strength. Amidst the deafening noise, the layer of translucent flesh and blood on the immortal's skin was smashed to pieces. But his purple-gold skeleton was so strong that even though Wu Qi had exhausted all his strength, he could not leave even a mark on it. After all, the immortal skeleton had been nourished by innate ghost energy for countless eons, making it as strong as the fleshly body of a primordial expert. How could the current Wu Qi hurt him? Fortunately, the immortal's intelligence had not recovered yet, and he could only act based on his instincts. When he gradually recalled the divine abilities and spells he had cultivated in the past from the marks on his body, and when he gradually learned how to absorb innate ghost energy to cultivate himself, Wu Qi would have to flee for his life whenever he saw him, and would not be able to beat him as casually as he did today. There was no other way to deal with the ancient immortal's body. Flustered and exasperated, Wu Qi sprayed out a large sheet of purple-green flame from his palms, burning the immortal's skull. The divine flame of order was specialized in destroying all kinds of evil things, fiends, ghosts, and other pure spiritual creatures. However, when Wu Qi sprayed out the divine flame of order, it immediately produced an unexpected and miraculous effect. The red flame in the ancient immortal's eyes was abruptly burned away by the divine flame of order. The immortal let out a shrill howl and fell heavily to the ground. As an ancient immortal who had just woken up 300 years ago, his poor divine sense was burned away by Wu Qi with the divine flame of order. Wu Qi looked at the purple-gold skeleton lying on the ground in horror. Suddenly, he let out a loud laugh, grabbed the skeleton, spun, and left. The ghost realm was indeed a place where one could make a fortune. Chapter 759. The Inferno Hell-Fiend flame was rolling and rocking in Wu Qi's palm, producing deep, deep fiend howls that could shake one's soul. Even the rocks around the cave were trembling slightly. After obtaining the ancient immortal's remains and the sword, Wu Qi immediately kept all the heavenly ghosts who had submitted to him into his interstitial world. After that, he hurriedly found the cave to receive the legacy of the ancient immortal. The 10 feet long, palm-wide and paper-thin, blood-red, centipede-shaped horse-slaying sword was rolling and rocking in the fiend flame. 90% of Wu Qi's mind was focused on this ball of fiend flame, constantly injecting wisp after wisp into the sword, breaking through the restrictive spells of nascent divinity and branding his divine will into the complicated restrictive spells in the sword. Perhaps because it had been penetrated by the innate ghost energy for countless eons, this centipede-shaped sword, which was supposed to be an immortal weapon, had been transformed into a ghost weapon of the evil path. Wu Qi did not have the cultivation technique of ghost cultivators, so he could not refine the sword with the most suitable technique. However, as he was cultivating the Inferno Hell-Fiend scripture, he could use the Inferno Hell-Fiend flame to refine the sword. Furthermore, the complicated and powerful restrictive spells in the sword were all recorded in the Scroll of Stealing. Different from the formations and restrictive spells that were commonly used by immortals to refine flying swords and magical treasures, this sword was forged in the primordial era, the same era as all the formations and restrictive spells in the Scroll of Stealing. Therefore, Wu Qi was able to easily break through all the restrictive spells, branding his divine will into the sword. When the last restrictive spell was broken, Wu Qi separated a thread of divine will and left it in the sword. Abruptly, the 10-feet-long blood-red sword transformed into a tiny centipede, less than 3 inches long. Like a living creature, it slithered and crawled all over Wu Qi's body, letting out deep buzzing noises from time to time. The tiny centipede shone with a bright light. Even with Wu Qi's cultivation base, when he cast a glance at it, the bright light made him feel a sharp pain in his eyes. What a treasure! Aobuzan lay on Wu Qi's head, his head hanging between Wu Qi's brows as he stared at the little centipede and said, "In ancient times, magical treasures were divided into 3 grades: supreme treasures of primal chaos, spirit treasures of chaos, and innate spirit artifacts. This is clearly an innate spirit artifact. Even for the primordial immortals of today, it is extremely difficult for them to gather the materials to forge an innate spirit artifact." Wu Qi pondered for a brief moment. The scroll of stealing had also mentioned about the classification of these 3 extraordinary treasures in the ancient times. Grand Mist treasures were spiritual treasures formed in the boundless Grand Mist before the great Saint Pangu created the world. The myriad manifestations star core that Wu Qi had obtained was also a Grand Mist treasure. Chaos spiritual treasures were powerful treasures that were born when Pangu created the world. Grand Mist spiritual energy fluctuated violently, triggering the laws of heaven and earth. Each of these treasures had the power to destroy heaven and earth, but in terms of magic, they were inferior to Grand Mist spiritual treasures. As for innate spirit artifacts, they were spirit weapons forged by powerful innate beings who had gathered all kinds of innate essences and gathered the primordial energy 1 aeon after Pangu created the world. Most of these spirit weapons were forged with some kind of powerful innate beings, just like the centipede-shaped sword in Wu Qi's hand. It was a treasure carefully forged with a centipede-like innate being as a cauldron and countless innate essences. This kind of spirit weapon was born with a spirit, and its sentience was extremely strong. Although it was not like the immortal artifacts forged by immortal cultivators, whose spirits could cultivate to become immortals, in terms of pure lethality, these spirit weapons were much stronger than most of the primordial immortal weapons of today. After countless apocalypses of heaven and earth, countless almighty experts had fallen since ancient times. Even if those primordial immortals had the method to forge innate spirit artifacts, they could not find a good innate being as a cauldron, and they could not gather so many innate essences as raw materials. Therefore, even though they knew that innate spirit artifacts were stronger than their primordial immortal weapons in terms of lethality, very few primordial immortals could forge an innate spirit artifact. "I'm rich." Wu Qi narrowed his eyes and smiled. "I'm rich." Aobuzan shook his head and said with emotion, "In order to forge a primordial immortal weapon, those primordial immortals had to work hard for countless eons, feeding the item's spirit inside with their own blood essence. I wonder how many tribulations they had to go through to forge a primordial immortal weapon successfully. Master, I can't believe you've obtained an innate spirit artifact so easily, and the owner of this treasure is dead and has almost no control over it. So, it didn't take you much effort to get it." Wu Qi looked gladly at the little blood-red centipede crawling on his shoulder and said with a smile, "Yes, I've struck it big this time. Fortune comes from danger, and the ancients did not deceive me. Well, I'll just call it Blood Centipede Sword." Wu Qi had given the sword a new name, and it was filled with sentience. Immediately, wisps of blood-red gleam burst out from the sword, and the razor-sharp sword intent sliced the cave where Wu Qi was hiding in. Large chunks of rocks kept falling down from the cave. Wu Qi and Aobuzan could not help but look at each other in astonishment. The killing intent emanating from this treasure was very fierce. When it was forged, it must have used countless supreme-grade materials that carried the innate killing intent. After marveling for a while, Wu Qi swallowed the blood centipede sword and let it swim back and forth in his veins, gradually nourishing it with his own blood essence. This kind of innate spirit artifact was different from the flying swords that immortals were accustomed to using nowadays. It had to be nourished with one's own blood essence, just like feeding a pet. The more blood essence it consumed, the more compatible it would be with the user, and the more powerful it would be. As for the flying swords and magic treasures used by immortals nowadays, unless they were natal magic treasures refined by immortals of the evil path, they only needed to be nourished with energy essence. As he felt the blood centipede sword gradually absorb his blood essence, Wu Qi took a deep breath and threw out the ancient immortal's corpse. This ancient immortal's body had been nourished and tempered by innate ghost energy for countless years. The layer of translucent flesh on the surface was actually the condensation of excess ghost energy. Although it had some defensive power, it was really useless compared to the skeleton of his true form. As he stroked the corpse, a large sheet of heavenly phoenix flame burst out of Wu Qi's palm and burned away the translucent flesh. An unpleasant stench of rotting corpses rose into the sky. All that was left of the ancient immortal's body was this strong skeleton, which had been tempered and polished to the point of being extremely strong. Even if Wu Qi tried his best, he could not leave a mark on it. He cast his divine sense into the skeleton. The purple gold skeleton was so dense that not even Wu Qi's divine sense could penetrate it. Instead, it was repelled by a layer of soft runes on the surface of the skeleton, which nearly shattered Wu Qi's divine sense. He tapped the skeleton with his finger, producing a crisp sound that sounded like the ringing of gold and jade. Wu Qi weighed the skeleton in his hand. The 9-foot-tall skeleton weighed hundreds of billions of kilograms, which was heavier than several mountains. This showed how dense the skeleton was. Gasping in shock, Wu Qi shook his head and said, "This treasure is not worth it if I use it to craft items." Aobuzan suddenly poked his head out, opened his mouth, and gave the skeleton a big bite on its shoulder blade. A loud cracking noise rang out, and sparks flew in all directions. Aobuzan howled miserably, holding his bleeding gums and retreating back into Wu Qi's hair. He roared furiously, "I can't craft items, and I can't eat it either. I'll just pour a puddle of urine on it and let it go down in history." Wu Qi shook his head. He pondered for a brief moment. Then the Stealing the Sky script, from the 7 foundation elevating technique found in Scroll of Stealing emerged in his mind. This Qi Stealing heavenly script should be the culmination of all the stealing techniques found in Scroll of Stealing. It contained countless magical techniques, and basically, it had reached the point where it could steal anything. It seemed that it was time for him to start cultivating this Stealing the Sky script. There was a divine ability in it called Stealing the Bone Exchanging Technique, and it just so happened that he could use the skeleton. The suggestion in the Stealing Heaven art for this bone-changing technique was that it was best to choose the golden body remains of an ancient Buddha to cultivate this technique. This cultivation technique could gradually extract the incomparably tyrannical bone essence of the ancient Buddha's remains and gradually refine it into one's own body. The more ancient Buddha's golden bodies used, the faster the cultivation speed would be, and the greater the benefits would be. According to the description in the bone exchanging technique, there was basically no limit to this technique. However many ancient Buddhas Wu Qi could obtain, he could fuse all the bone essence into his own bones. If he could fuse a few ancient Buddha's golden bodies, his bones would truly be indestructible. Once the bones were strong, the marrow would be strong as well, and the internal organs, meridians, and blood would undergo a transformation. This was a technique that could strengthen the fleshly body from the root. Furthermore, by using the bone exchanging technique to strengthen one's bones, it was much faster than cultivating by oneself. According to the bone exchanging technique, as long as one had the cultivation base of a heaven immortal, one could completely digest and absorb an ancient Buddha's golden body in just 100 years. But now that Wu Qi had the cultivation base of a gold immortal, Wu Qi reckoned that perhaps it would only take him a few years to completely assimilate the skeleton in front of him. After a moment of silence, Wu Qi cupped his fist and bowed to the purple gold skeleton, then said, "Senior." But before he could finish his sentence, Wu Qi suddenly laughed self-deprecatingly and said, "What are you talking about? Your soul has already perished, and the little bit of consciousness that you had just regrown has been destroyed by me. Do you really think you can understand what I'm talking about?" Sneering, Wu Qi opened his mouth, and a chaotic beam of light rushed out, instantly swallowing the purple gold skeleton into his belly. In his interstitial world, countless chaotic energies followed Wu Qi's will and condensed into a huge cauldron, Then he placed the skeleton in it and slowly burned it. Wu Qi's natal blood essence was used as firewood, emitting a crimson flame in the cauldron, while Wu Qi's natal flame condensed into strange runes, gradually burning the purple-gold skeleton. Gradually, tiny purple-gold particles drifted out of the skeleton. After being purified and refined by the cauldron condensed from chaotic energies, they flew out of the interstitial world and sank into Wu Qi's bones. Suddenly, tiny beads of sweat broke out from Wu Qi's body, and his bones felt hot. Torrential streams of heat kept flowing back and forth in his bone marrow, giving him an indescribable pleasure that nearly made him scream out loud. The sky-stealing bone-changing technique was indeed marvelous. A bright light shone from Wu Qi's eyes. Just as he was about to let out a joyful roar, a deep, violent dragon roar suddenly came from his body. The soul of Taotai, which he had absorbed, suddenly transformed into a beam of light and dove into the huge cauldron. It gripped the lid tightly with its 4 feet, while a blinding blood-red flame burst out from its body. The soul of Taotai proactively helped Wu Qi absorb and refine the skeleton. With the help of the innate devouring power of Taotai, Wu Qi's speed of refining the skeleton was increased by 100 times. Wu Qi was struck with a wild joy. He did a quick calculation and found that in at most 1 month, he would be able to completely refine this skeleton. The soul of Taotai was so miraculous that Wu Qi threw his head back and roared excitedly. His roar shook the surrounding caves, causing them to rumble and collapse. Chapter 760. As he sensed the gradual changes in his bones, Wu Qi could not help but burst into laughter. As a gold immortal, every move he made was enough to destroy heaven and earth. Wu Qi laughed heartily. His roar was as loud as thunder, and the sound waves overlapped and turned into a terrible energy shockwave that swept out in all directions. The cave he was hiding in was near the foot of a 10,000 miles tall mountain. Now, as he laughed out loud, the 10,000 miles tall mountain above him suddenly collapsed, and the huge mountain was instantly shattered into countless pieces, scattering in all directions. His laughter rolled and swept in all directions, uprooting the nearby hills and ridges. Thick rock layers twisted and cracked amidst the white sound waves, and tens of miles thick rock layers were forcibly scraped up. Hundreds of miles in circumference, rock layers flew up into the air amidst a grating noise. Vibrated by the sound waves, the twisted rock layers were instantly shattered into pieces. Large and small broken rocks darted out in all directions, bringing up countless white airwaves in the air. Wu Qi's laughter had caused a destructive change to the terrain within thousands of miles. With him as the center, a crater more than 300 miles deep appeared out of nowhere. The inside of the crater, thousands of miles in diameter, was as smooth as a mirror, and the sound waves produced by Wu Qi's laughter had polished the inside of the crater so smooth that even a fly could not stand still. Thousands of miles away, a great river that was hundreds of miles wide was also affected by the laughter. The river water was pushed up into the sky by the laughter, and in the river, countless ferocious-looking large fishes and aquatic beasts exploded into pieces. All kinds of blood dyed the yellow river water colorful and dazzling. The laughter lasted for a full quarter of an hour before it stopped. When Wu Qi stopped, he could not help but look around in horror. He had just laughed to his heart's content, but it had caused such a destructive effect. Was this the power of a gold immortal? The rocks and sand in the ghost realm were soaked in ghost energy, making them as hard as ordinary heaven immortal artifacts. Even if an ordinary peak-level heaven immortal came to the ghost realm and exhausted all his immortal energy, he could only create a crater thousands of feet in diameter in the ground. Yet, Wu Qi's laughter could create a crater thousands of miles in diameter. With his cultivation base as a 5th-tier gold immortal, it would be shocking if it got out. Shaking his head, Wu Qi patted Ao Buzan, who was lying on his head and had been dazed by his laughter. "The power of a gold immortal is so strong," he said in a low voice. "I'll have to be careful in the future. No wonder Yu forbade those powerful immortals to enter Pangu continent." Tiske, if that gold immortal were to go to a city and laugh, wouldn't he kill all the people in it? Aobusen stuck his tongue out, his saliva dripping onto Wu Qi's hair. The saliva was quickly absorbed by Wu Qi's hair, so much so that Wu Qi's hair became glossy and had a faint fragrance. "Isn't that right?" Aobusen murmured. Years ago, when Lao Tzu peeped at White Emperor's daughter bathing in his palace, he killed thousands of White Emperor's personal guards with a dragon roar. While Aobusen was bragging about his glorious past, a dark cloud, about 100 miles in circumference, suddenly appeared out of thin air in the distant sky. Accompanied by a chilly wind, the dark cloud rolled and flew toward Wu Qi. With Wu Qi's eyesight, he could see two men standing on the dark cloud from a distance of over 1,000 miles. Each of them was clad in a long black robe and had a small black conical hat on their head. One of them was holding a black iron medallion, while the other was holding a black iron chain. The two men's faces were pale, and a chilly wind was blowing around them. From time to time, white flames would burst out of their bodies and turn into ghostly shadows dancing in the air behind them. Their eyes were ablaze with an eerie green flame, which was tens of feet long and gave off a bone-piercing cold light. The green flame illuminated the area within 1,000 feet around them, giving them an eerie aura. As he carefully scanned the two strangely dressed men with his divine sense, Wu Qi's heart skipped a beat. The two men looked thin and frail, as if they could be blown away by a gust of wind, but the ghost energy in their bodies was vast and unfathomable. Their cultivation bases and realms were actually several levels higher than Wu Qi's. At least, Wu Qi could not see through their cultivation bases. But the pressure they gave Wu Qi was not as strong as that of the sovereign and Prabhudaratna Buddha. In other words, they had not reached the realm of primordial immortals, but were two extremely powerful gold immortals. This was the ghost realm, where the world was filled with rich ghost energy and all kinds of evil energy. The natural energy and the energies of the 5 elements that immortal cultivators could control did not exist here. If ordinary immortals entered the ghost realm, their cultivation bases would be suppressed to less than 1/10 of their original strength. On the other hand, the cultivation bases of ghost immortals and heavenly ghosts would become extremely strong. Ghost immortals of heaven immortal realm could unleash the prowess of gold immortals in the ghost realm, and ghost immortals and heavenly ghosts of peak gold immortal realm could fight against primordial immortals. Therefore, Wu Qi's face turned very serious. His chaotic energy could also absorb the ghost energy and all kinds of evil energy from the outside world and turn them into his own, but he was not familiar with the means of ghost cultivators, which made him innately weak when fighting with others in the ghost realm. And these two powerful ghost immortals in front of him could be strengthened by the ghost realm. Without even fighting, Wu Qi knew that he was no match for them. He could only hope that they were not here to cause him trouble. Wu Qi slowly flew up into the sky, hovering in midair on a dark cloud. For a gold immortal, a distance of 1,000 miles was no different from standing face to face with an ordinary person. Wu Qi did not want to turn around and flee without asking the purpose of their visit. Soon, the dark cloud was less than 10 miles away from Wu Qi, and only then did it slow down and finally approach about a mile away. The two black-robed men squinted at Wu Qi. The dark cloud behind them rolled, and then dozens of shadows darted out of it at high speed, baring their teeth and staring at Wu Qi. The two black-robed men were obviously ghost immortals who had become human cultivators, and the dozens of shadows darting out of their backs were obviously powerful heavenly ghosts. Unlike the heavenly ghosts in the valley Wu Qi had subdued, the dozens of heavenly ghosts in front of him had very high cultivation bases, so their appearance had been transformed to be similar to that of a human being. They were all handsome men and beautiful women who looked no different from humans. If it had not been for the row of sharp bone spikes growing out of the back of their heads and the long shiny tail wrapped around their waists like a belt, Wu Qi would not have been able to distinguish them from ordinary humans. Compared with the ordinary heavenly ghosts who looked like monsters, these heavenly ghosts had the cultivation base of gold immortals, which allowed them to reconstruct their fleshly bodies, and possessed higher intelligence, which made them no different from ordinary immortals. Only those heavenly ghosts who had reached the realm of gold immortals could restrain the greed and desire in their nature. Even the tribe of heavenly ghosts in the valley that Wu Qi had subdued could barely maintain their intelligence in the ghost realm. But if they were allowed to go to Pangu continent, when they smelled the fragrance of flesh and blood of humans and other living beings, they would be unable to control their instincts and kill and devour them. The dozens of high-grade heavenly ghosts fixed their eyes on Wu Qi. The man with the medallion among the two black-robed men suddenly asked, "Fellow immortal, have you seen a dark green dragon boat passing by? A few days ago, we sensed his presence in the vicinity, but his aura quickly dissipated. I wonder if fellow immortal has seen him?" Wu Qi was slightly taken aback. Did these two men bring so many high-grade heavenly ghosts just to find the ancient immortal whom Wu Qi had subdued? Looking down at the huge crater his laughter had created, Wu Qi smiled, cupped his fist, and said, "Greetings, fellow immortals. This humble Taoist has never seen the person the two fellow immortals spoke of." The two black-robed men exchanged a glance, their eyes flickering for a moment. It was obvious that they had suddenly become a lot more dispirited. The man with the iron chain snorted coldly. Glancing at the huge crater on the ground, he said coldly, "Since you haven't seen him, let's forget about it. Well, do you have a travel document issued by the 13 great heavenly ghost kings or the 400 ghost saints? If you do, please show it to me." A travel document issued by the heavenly ghost kings and ghost saints? What the hell is that? Wu Qi stared blankly at the two men. Their expressions changed abruptly, and a green beam shot out from their eyes, stretching for hundreds of feet. The man holding the token shouted sternly, "Who are you, immortal? How did you sneak into the ghost realm? We are the special envoys of Great Yu's Hunda Ghost King, who are responsible for patrolling this ghost realm. Quickly tell us who you are, or you will be turned into ashes." Chuckling, Wu Qi suddenly retreated dozens of miles and said in a deep voice, "I'm sorry, but I really don't know how I got here." "Well, the green dragon boat you mentioned? I saw it from a distance of thousands of miles a few days ago. But the person on the dragon boat is so fierce, I don't dare to strike up a conversation with him." Pointing in a direction, Wu Qi laughed dryly and said, "It's about 7,000 miles this way. If you rush there, you might be able to see that senior in a crimson robe." The two Ghost King's special envoys were obviously at a loss. Wu Qi's background was unknown, so they had to capture him and interrogate him. However, they could not let go of the dragon boat that Wu Qi had mentioned. Their main duty was to find the dragon boat and capture the man on it before he fully gained his sentience. This was also the main task that Great Yu's Hunda Ghost King had given them hundreds of years ago. The ancient immortal on the dragon boat was very secretive. The two special envoys had worked together to capture him a few times, but he had escaped a few times, which had aroused the dissatisfaction of their master. Therefore, when Wu Qi said that the dragon boat had appeared 7,000 miles away, they had to rush there and check it out. But what about Wu Qi? The two ghost immortals exchanged a glance and suddenly cried out hoarsely, "We only sensed the aura of the man on the dragon boat 7 days ago, and we can't find him even if we rush there now. You, on the other hand, are sneaky. You'd better let us capture you and bring you back to report." The ghost immortal shook his wrist, and the long iron chain abruptly split into thousands of chains as thick as a human wrist, filling the void with ear-splitting whistling noises. In the next moment, a huge net made of iron chains came looming over Wu Qi, emanating a tremendous suction force from the center of the net. The dozens of high-grade heavenly ghosts around him fled into the dark clouds at the same time. Dark shadows flashed around them as they were ready to pounce on Wu Qi at any time. Wu Qi gave a strange laugh, then with a sway of his body, he teleported thousands of miles away. Chapter 761. Wu Qi flew forward, cursing and swearing all the way. He felt that he had been down on his luck for the past few days. First, he was torn open by someone with a very powerful magical artifact and thrown into the ghost realm. Although he had subdued a group of heavenly ghosts and obtained many natural treasures, which had barely made up for his mental loss, and then he met a destitute ancient immortal and gained a lot of benefits, he finally calmed down a little. Just when he thought his luck was getting better, he was chased by 2 peak-level gold immortals and a group of high-grade heavenly ghosts. His luck seemed to have taken a turn for the worse again. The two peak-level gold immortals were just hanging behind Wu Qi from a distance, letting out strange, eerie howls from time to time. But the group of high-grade heavenly ghosts kept looming around Wu Qi like maggots on a bone. From time to time, they would suddenly rush out of one of the dark clouds around him and give him a flurry of attacks. There was a rumor among the immortals in the outside world that one should never compete with heavenly ghosts in the ghost realm in terms of speed, as it was something that would make one collapse and despair. Some primordial immortals had even said that in the ghost realm, the speed of heavenly ghosts was incomparable to that of ordinary primordial immortals. Although the cultivation bases of the two peak-level gold immortals were much stronger than Wu Qi, they were not as fast as Wu Qi. But, although these heavenly ghosts were not as strong as Wu Qi, they could fly very fast. Although they could not break through the void to teleport, their speed was still much faster than Wu Qi's. From time to time, heavenly ghosts would jump out of the void and kick at Wu Qi, while a couple of tails would wrap around Wu Qi. Wu Qi, who was flying at full speed, was harassed by them and could not fly at full speed. Instead, he was gradually caught up by the two powerful ghost immortals. With a furious roar, Wu Qi mustered all his strength and threw a punch at a high-grade heavenly ghost who was leaping at him. The heavenly ghost who was lunging at Wu Qi was an extremely beautiful young woman. She had red lips, white teeth, and a slim figure. Even on Panga continent, she would be a first-rate beauty. After cultivating to the realm of gold immortals, heavenly ghosts could reforge their bodies and make them 90% similar to humans. When they reached the realm of primordial immortals, they could evolve their bodies to be exactly the same as humans. The beautiful young woman flew over, her fingernails more than a foot long. The sharp nails tore through the void and slashed toward Wu Qi's neck with 10 green beams. Her slender tail, which was over 200 feet long, shot out from between her legs like a spear and stabbed straight toward Qi's forehead. The tails of heavenly ghosts were extremely tough, and the strength of their tails was several times stronger than their limbs. The long tail swept toward Wu Qi with a gust of wind. Although the tip of the tail was still 100 feet away from Wu Qi's forehead, a gust of cold wind had already sunk Wu Qi's forehead by about an inch. Wu Qi's heavy punch hit the heavenly ghost's claws, causing her arms to shatter inch by inch with a miserable howl. The heavy punch destroyed the heavenly ghost's hands and landed heavily on her chest. A miserable howl rang out as the heavenly ghost suddenly turned into a plume of smoke and drifted away. The next moment, she reappeared in a dark cloud a few miles away. A vast amount of ghost energy was constantly being injected into her body, and her twisted and broken arms were healing rapidly amidst cracking sounds. This was the most troublesome thing about heavenly ghosts. Their fleshly bodies were extremely strong, and now that they were fighting in the ghost realm, which was their home ground, with the nourishment of the endless innate ghost energy, they could almost be regarded as immortal. As long as Wu Qi's strike did not kill all their life force, as long as they were still breathing, they would be able to recover in just a few breaths of time. Even if their divine souls were severely injured, they could still recover in just a few breaths. This was the powerful blessing heavenly ghosts had obtained in the ghost realm, and it was also the reason why they dared to confront the celestial court and Diyu with only 13 great heavenly ghost kings and 400 ghost saints. If dozens of primordial immortals or supreme oracles dared to rush into the ghost realm, they would not necessarily be able to kill a great heavenly ghost king. On the contrary, the nearly immortal great heavenly ghost kings could fight a protracted battle with any enemy here. And since there was no natural energy here that primordial immortals and supreme oracles could use, they could drag out any enemy to death. The sound of clothes tearing rang out as several heavenly ghosts flew to Wu Qi's side, their sharp claws ripping his robe and leaving deep bloody marks on his tough skin. The dark green venom seeped into Wu Qi's body from their nails, and as soon as Wu Qi's blood flowed out of his body, it quickly turned pale green and emitted a foul stench of decay. Wu Qi was shocked. The venom of these high-level heavenly ghosts was really amazing. Hastily, he exercised the dragon kill and abruptly grew to a height of 100 feet, his body covered with 3 layers of thick dragon scales. A great pressure spread out in all directions. Wu Qi opened his mouth, turned his head, and suddenly breathed out a stream of crimson flame at a heavenly ghost that was approaching him. The violent true flame of the dragon clan transformed into a tens of feet thick pillar of flame and thrust out whistling. The heavenly ghost's face turned pale with fright, and he hastily twisted his body to avoid the front of the pillar of flame. But one of his calves was grazed by the flame, and it was burned to ashes in an instant. But then, something happened that made Wu Qi feel helpless. The heavenly ghost, whose calves had been burned to ashes, retreated a few miles, took a few deep breaths, and the calves that were burned by the true flame of the dragons were suddenly regenerated, looking exactly the same as before. Helpless, Wu Qi let out a long roar. Large amounts of green poisonous blood kept oozing out of the wound torn by the heavenly ghost, but his muscles squirmed and quickly healed. The dragon kill was a powerful divine ability developed by Yu, especially for those who cultivated both fleshly and magic. It had a strong resistance to all evil forces and toxins. Although the venom on the heavenly ghost's claws was very strong, the cultivation base of these heavenly ghosts was far weaker than Wu Qi's, so they could not really do anything to him. Coiled around Wu Qi's neck, Ao Buzan saw that the true flame of the dragon seemed to have a restraining effect on these heavenly ghosts, so he hurriedly opened his mouth and breathed out. The crimson dragon flame spread in all directions, forcing the heavenly ghosts who had been harassing Wu Qi to scatter. The dragon python sisters let out deep roars as well. They opened their mouths and shot out beams of golden and silver light that enveloped Wu Qi as if he was shrouded in crimson flames and a rain of golden and silver light. The heavenly ghosts that kept approaching him were forced back, and several of them were hit by the light. Whether it was golden or silver light beams, they immediately pierced head-sized wounds on these heavenly ghosts when they hit them, forcing them to retreat and absorb innate ghost energy to heal themselves. Wu Qi, Ao Buzan, and the dragon python sisters unleashed their might at the same time, forcibly opening a path through the encirclement of these heavenly ghosts. But, before Wu Qi could fly far, the two ghost immortals behind him suddenly roared at the same time. The ghost immortal with the iron chain shook his hand again, turning the chain into a huge fishing net and falling down on Wu Qi's head. Meanwhile, the other ghost immortal with the token gave a cold snort, turned the token in his hand into a huge, heavy iron plate, and smashed it down heavily at Wu Qi's back. After flying up into the air, the token turned into a huge piece of iron that measured 100 miles long, more than 10 miles wide, and 3 miles thick. A strong yin energy wrapped around it, and it came smashing down with a suffocating pressure. There was also a tremendous suction force pulling at Wu Qi's body, making it difficult for him to move for a moment. Wu Qi looked back at the token, and his heart gave a violent jerk. It was a gold immortal artifact, and it was definitely a supreme grade one. It should be a first grade or second grade gold immortal artifact. He was very familiar with the suction force. It was exactly the same as the one emanating from the mountains around the valley where the heavenly ghost tribe lived. The fact that it could imprison Wu Qi and make him unable to move proved that the token was too powerful. Wu Qi felt as if he was being weighed down by countless mountains, so heavy that he could not even move a finger freely. With a wry smile, Wu Qi was about to spit out the blood centipede sword to kill all the ghost immortals and heavenly ghosts when a loud, sonorous dragon roar suddenly rang out in the distance. Upon hearing it, the faces of the two ghost immortals and the heavenly ghosts turned even more unsightly than those of ghosts. A great sheet of golden light shone through the dense dark clouds. Amidst the light, a vigorous golden dragon, about a mile long, was galloping toward them with his head held high, treading on a vast expanse of purple mist. Standing on the dragon's head was a handsome young man in white, holding a jade flute in his hand and looking at them with a smile. "Hold on, ghost emissaries. This young man is an important minister of Yu, so you can't touch even a hair of his. Otherwise, don't blame me for going to your palace and making you dance for 3 to 5 years." The two ghost immortals looked as if they had just stepped into dog shit. They exchanged a glance, put away their artifacts at the same time, gritted their teeth, and bowed deeply to the young man. Then, they whistled shrilly. Dozens of high-grade heavenly ghosts hurriedly scurried back into the dark clouds behind them, then flew back the way they came without saying a word. As they flew at top speed, the ghost immortal with the token turned his head and shouted at the young man, "Since Prince Chongqing is here to protect him, he must be a good man. Please don't take it to heart, Prince Chongqing." Prince Chongqing? Wu Qi's heart skipped a beat. The Yellow Emperor's grandson was called Shijun, and Shijun was born in the northern barbarian desert. There was Mount Mang. There was Mount Gu. There was Mount Shao, and on top of it was a man called Prince Chongqing. Zhuanshu gave birth to Old Tong gave birth to Zhu Rong, and Zhu Rong gave birth to Prince Chongqing. According to the Zhuozhuan, there were 3 birds of the 5 musical birds: the emperor bird, the Luan bird, and the phoenix bird, who danced when they heard the zither. Prince Chongqing was a direct descendant of the Yellow Emperor Xinyuan, and he was born with a jade zither in his arms. He was good at playing all kinds of music and could make birds and beasts dance when they heard the music. Wu Qi stared blankly at Prince Chongqing. As a direct descendant of the Yellow Emperor Xinyuan, his status in De Yu's court was unimaginable. Why was he here? He was a figure from the ancient times, and even the current Emperor Haozuan and Ji Kuei were only his grandchildren. Why was he in the ghost realm? Especially, how did he know that Wu Qi was De Yu's subject? And how did he meet Wu Qi here? Chongqing came before Wu Qi with a smile on his face. He nodded to Wu Qi and said, "Come with me. Where are your subordinates?" Wu Qi was taken aback. He breathed out Dark Een Celestial Tower and released the Jade Armor Dark Turtle flying ship. Chapter 762. Stepping on the Golden Dragon, Chongqing rode on a cloud, shrouded in a clear mist. A beam of light shot up tens of thousands of feet behind his head, piercing through the thick dark clouds and mist and emitting a vast expanse of yellow light in the sky. Prince Chongqing gently waved the jade flute and let out a soft cry that sounded like a dragon's roar. Wherever the Golden Dragon passed, countless heavenly ghosts and all kinds of strange creatures in the ghost realm fled, fleeing as far as they could at their fastest speed. The Jade Armor Mystic Turtle flying ship was pulled by an invisible, flexible force, gliding across the sky gracefully. Standing on the back of the ship, Wu Qi stared blankly at Prince Chongqing, who was flying at high speed in front of him. The extraordinarily handsome Prince Chongqing looked like an immortal, but there was no immortal energy in his body. Instead, it was filled with a purple mist so strong that Wu Qi found it hard to believe. When Wu Qi's divine sense swept across Chongqing, the purple mist in his body shone with a blinding light like a small purple sun in Wu Qi's line of sight, making it impossible for Wu Qi to look straight at him. He was strong, unimaginably strong. No wonder the 2 emissaries of the Ghost Lords fled as if they had seen a ghost. Prince Chongqing did have the strength to make people flee at the first sign of his name. But why was this direct descendant of the Yellow Emperor Xinyuan, who only existed in myths and legends, here? Why was he in the ghost realm? And how did he know that Wu Qi and his subordinates were here? And how did he come here? As if sensing the deep doubt in Wu Qi's eyes, Prince Chongqing turned his head, smiled at Wu Qi, and said in a gentle voice, "The Marquis of Eastsea was sent into the void by someone, wasn't he? A few days ago, I entered the void and found the traces of the Marquis of Eastsea and his subordinates. That's why I brought the Marquis of Eastsea here." Only after hearing Prince Chongqing's words did Wu Qi learn what had happened. Prince Chongqing had a territory in the ghost realm that was independent of the 13 great heavenly ghost kings and the 400 ghost saints. A few days ago, he had entered the void on the peak of Mount Chifeng, the highest peak in his territory. It was a unique mystic art that allowed one to fuse their divine will with the void to comprehend the great Tao of heaven and earth. He happened to see Wu Qi and his companions flying in disarray in the void while being swept away by the raging energy tides. According to the direction in which Wu Qi and his companions were flying, if Chongqing had not intervened, Wu Qi and his companions would have been dragged into the heavenly fiend realm. It was a place whose natural environment was 1,000,000 times harsher than the ghost realm of the Nine Nether, where the creatures were even more brutal and ferocious, and where even ordinary primordial immortals did not dare to set foot. It was also the source of the Fiend Path's divine abilities and cultivation techniques practiced by all fiend immortals in the world, the birthplace of the Fiend Path's ancestors. Hastily, Changqin used a great divine ability to break the void and helped Wu Qi tear open the outer barrier of the ghost realm, bringing him into the ghost realm. But recently, some unforeseen events had taken place in the ghost realm. With Changqin's overall strength, he could have brought Wu Qi and his companions directly into his territory. But, because of the unforeseen events in the ghost realm, an external force had interfered with his plan, and the landing point of Wu Qi and his companions was far away from his territory. Worried about the safety of Wu Qi and his companions, Changqin had left his territory to search for Wu Qi and his companions. Today, he had found a place less than 10,000 miles away from Wu Qi, and it just so happened that Wu Qi and a group of heavenly ghosts were engaged in a fierce battle. The ripples of energy that spread in all directions had attracted his attention, and that was why he had arrived in time to drive away the two ghost emissaries and the group of heavenly ghosts. Wu Qi bowed deeply to Changqin to express his gratitude. Wu Qi knew very well what kind of place the heavenly fiend realm was. Only a handful of people in the entire universe knew about its existence. However, as Wu Qi had inherited the scroll of stealing, he happened to be one of them who knew the details about it. Like the ghost realm, the heavenly fiend realm was an independent world formed by the fusion of a broken fragment of Pangu continent and the first thread of innate fiend energy. The heavenly ghosts of the ghost realm were cruel and greedy, while the fiends of the heavenly fiend realm were treacherous, cruel, violent, greedy, and evil. Almost all the negative adjectives in the world could be used to describe them. Compared to the heavenly ghosts who acted only on instinct, these fiends were much more difficult to deal with and posed a greater threat to immortal cultivators and all other living beings. At the thought that he, Huang Liang, and a group of his subordinates were almost dragged into the heavenly fiend realm, Wu Qi could not help but feel his scalp go numb, and at the same time, his hatred for Liu Bang and King Zhangqiu deepened. He swore to himself that he would repay Liu Bang and King Zhangqiu for their deep friendship, and at the same time, he felt even greater respect and gratitude for Prince Changqin. After being dragged into the void by Liu Bang with the sky-veiling flag of chaos, Wu Qi had personally experienced the mighty, irresistible, and terrible power of the flag. He also knew that Prince Changqin had fused his divine will with the void to comprehend the great Tao of heaven and earth, and he had hurriedly used an almighty divine ability to guide such a huge jade armor dark turtle flying ship to break through the barrier of the ghost realm and enter it. However, Prince Changqin did not hesitate to consume his divine will to rescue Wu Qi and his companions. On top of that, Prince Changqin was extraordinarily handsome, and his way of dealing with people was as bright and warm as the sun. Therefore, Wu Qi had a very good impression of him. He told Wu Qi about how he rescued Wu Qi and his companions, then pointed out the mountains and rivers along the way, and introduced some famous rivers and mountains in the ghost realm to Wu Qi. The terrain of the ghost realm was treacherous. Some of the rivers were as wide as 10,000 miles, and the drop between the upper and lower reaches was frighteningly huge. Torrents of water poured down like meteors, and the force of impact was strong enough to tear any existence below the realm of gold immortal to pieces. Even in such treacherous waters, fish and dragons could be seen lurking, and from time to time, huge flood dragons could be seen lurking in the water. These flood dragons were the ghost dragons of the ghost realm. They were ghosts that had lost their lives and were nourished by ghost energy, and possessed divine abilities and magic power no weaker than that of true dragons. The mountains they passed by were even more bizarre. Some of them were born with powerful magnetic forces, which could pull anything from hundreds of thousands of miles away. Even Wu Qi could not resist the force. It was only thanks to Prince Changqin's protection that he and his companions safely crossed the mountains. Some of the mountains were extremely cold, or perhaps because of the extreme in-ghost energy, they gave birth to a wisp of true fire of yang, which burned the land hundreds of thousands of miles around red. Some mountains kept erupting enormous thunderbolts, while others would spray out poisonous miasma of various colors from time to time. There were countless dangerous places in the world. After flying for hundreds of millions of miles at high speed and flying over countless mountains and rivers, A boundless plain appeared in front of them. The plain was surrounded by 9 rivers of fire, each 1,000,000 miles wide and filled with purple lava. Between the rivers of fire were 9 quicksand belts that stretched for millions of miles, and between the quicksand belts were 9 swamps filled with poisonous miasma. In the middle of the swamps were 9 ring-shaped flaming trees, burning fiercely as if they were made of steel. Purple smoke and red flames towered tens of thousands of miles into the sky, cutting off the passage ahead. Riding on the golden dragon, Changqin led the way. Wherever they passed, all the natural obstacles were cleared away. Whether it was the terrible pillars of fire that erupted from the rivers of fire from time to time, the powerful suction that made Wu Qi's face turn pale in the quicksand belts, the poisonous miasma in the swamps that almost corroded the shell of the jade armor dark turtle flying ship, or the purple smoke and red flames rising from the flaming trees that were so hot that they could burn the sky to ashes. All the natural obstacles made way for Wu Qi and his companions like gentle lambs, allowing them to pass safely. In the middle of these natural obstacles was a fertile plain that stretched for tens of millions of miles. A lake as blue as the finest sapphire lay quietly at the foot of a lofty mountain. A breeze blew across the surface of the lake, but there was not even the slightest ripple. Thousands of golden dragons lay quietly at the bottom of the lake. Occasionally, when they opened their eyes, wisps of fierce golden light would shoot straight into the sky. The mountain next to the lake stood tens of thousands of miles tall and was divided into 9 layers from top to bottom. Each layer of the mountain had a gateway made of fine jade and gold at the 4 cardinal directions of the mountain. Beneath these gateways stood long-bow men, who stood over 10,000 feet tall, clad in heavy armors and holding heavy weapons. Like an indestructible mountain, they guarded the gateway that led to the mountain. High up in the sky, there were feathermen riding on rocks, whose bodies were glinting with a golden light and whose claws were emitting purple-blue electric arcs. At a glance, the sky above the lofty mountain that almost occupied the entire plain was filled with rocks, and there were at least 1 billion feathermen patrolling in the sky. On top of the lofty mountain were streams, waterfalls, valleys, peaks that towered into the sky, and bottomless crevices. All the rocks were made of a material that looked like fine jade, and they were covered with countless exotic flowers and plants, some of which were extinct on Panga continent, at least, the Langxian tree that Wu Qi had never seen before. The trees, which stood tens of thousands of feet tall and twisted like dragons, were covered with all kinds of beautiful jades, and some translucent fruits were hidden among them. When the wind blew past, an exotic fragrance wafted into the air, making one feel refreshed. Looking into the mountain gate directly opposite Wu Qi, he saw tall towers and watchtowers, as well as barracks and tents. Under the supervision of heavily armored captains, large groups of soldiers were undergoing what could only be described as cruel training, tempering their bodies with the cruelest means, so that their bodies, which were on the verge of collapse, could quickly absorb the rich purple energy emitted from the lofty mountain to nourish their fleshly bodies, heal their injuries, and rapidly improve their overall strength. The soldiers' bodies were covered with scars of all shapes and sizes. Some were caused by wild beasts, some were caused by swords and sabers, and some were caused by powerful immortal techniques. Judging from these scars alone, one could tell that these soldiers were the absolute elites who had survived hundreds of battles. Compared to these expressionless, gray-eyed soldiers, the imperial army of Dayu's capital city, Liangzhu, was like comparing a boy scout to a professional butcher. Changqin turned to smile at Wu Qi, then nodded and said, "Welcome to Mount Kunlun. Now, this is the garrison of my imperial army, and the Kunlun Heavenly Pass, where I, Dayu, deter the ghost realm." Mount Kunlun. Changqin's imperial army. Kunlun Heavenly Pass. Taking a deep breath, Wu Qi directed the jade armor dark turtle flying ship to follow Changqin into the lofty mountain. Chapter 763. On the top of Mount Kunlun, Wu Qi and Prince Changqin sat opposite each other in a gazebo surrounded by Langxian trees and various exotic flowers. The gazebo had a very good view. As long as one was strong enough, They could see hundreds of millions of miles away without any cover in the surroundings. A great sheet of bright light sprinkled down from the sky, enveloping the whole of Mount Kunlun. It was the only place in the ghost realm that was shrouded by starlight. But, unlike the usual unobstructed starlight, the sky above Mount Kunlun was also filled with faint dark clouds today. 2 blood-red moons hung high above the mountain, their cold and merciless red lights sprinkling down from the sky and shattering the silver-purple starlight. As the blood-red light shone on Mount Kunlun, all the exotic flowers and plants looked a little listless. Prince Changqin fished out a golden scroll from under his sleeve. As he flipped the scroll, a beam of light shot out from it, amidst which Wu Qi's figure appeared. He nodded to Wu Qi with a smile and said, "Once you conferred a new title of Marquis of Province, the corresponding figure and title will appear in the Diyu map in Changqin's hand. The heavenly Tao has bestowed immeasurable virtues upon you when you helped King Yu Feng kill immortal Ding Jun. Changqin admires you greatly." Wu Qi bowed slightly to Changqin with a smile and said, "You flatter me, Your Highness. It's just a small contribution." It was not until now that Wu Qi realized how Changqin knew his title at first glance. "The Diyu map. Diyu map? Do you really have such an amazing treasure?" Wu Qi thought to himself. If even Prince Changqin had such an amazing treasure, it was hard to say that the Yellow Emperor Xianyuan did not have something similar. At the thought that his title might have been known by the Yellow Emperor, Wu Qi felt an indescribable feeling welling up in his heart. The Yellow Emperor Xianyuan was one of the legendary ancestors of the human race. When Wu Qi thought that he might have had some contact with the Yellow Emperor, the dreamlike feeling was indescribable. Changqin rolled up the scroll and hid it in his sleeve. Outside the gazebo, on a path paved with white jade, 2 beautiful girls dressed in light pink and white dresses were walking slowly toward him. One of them was carrying a fruit platter in her hand, filled with dozens of strange fruits that were recorded in the scroll of stealing, but Wu Qi had never seen before. The other girl was carrying a wine pot and 2 wine cups. Although they were still several hundred feet away from the pavilion, the aroma of the wine coming out from the wine pot had already made Wu Qi feel like he was about to be drunk. Changqin personally poured wine for him and eagerly advised him to eat a few more exotic fruits that were a specialty of Mount Kunlun. These fruits had all kinds of magical effects, such as strengthening one's physical strength, making one run like the wind, brightening one's eyes and improving one's vision, sharpening one's hearing, allowing one to hear the whispers of insects, and so on. But the most precious were the 20 or so Langxian jade fruits that grew from the Langxian tree. These fruits were shaped like apples, and their entire bodies were red and translucent, as if they were carved from red jade. A wisp of warm water vapor lingered around these fruits, emitting a powerful aura of life. These fruits had no other use but to prolong one's life. One fruit could give one 47,000 years of life, and if one were to consume 9 of them in a row, one could extend one's life by 1,080,000 years. Unfortunately, a person could only consume 9 of them at most, and after that, it would no longer have any effect even if one ate them as a meal. Every 1,000 years, the human emperor of Diyu would hold a meeting to reward his subjects, and occasionally, these Langxian jade fruits would be given out. They were the supreme treasures that all the important subjects and members of the imperial clan of Diyu sought after. Among all the spirit herbs that could prolong one's life, the effect of these Langxian jade fruits was one of the best. Prince Changqin was treating his guests with the Langxian jade fruits, which were extremely precious in Diyu, and it looked like he was really eating these rare treasures as a meal. In any case, for every Langxian jade fruit Wu Qi ate, he would just give one to him. Amidst a series of crunching sounds, Changqin ate 12 Langxian jade fruits as if they were apples, and did not feel any heartache at all. Wu Qi looked at Prince Changqin speechlessly. The juice of the Langxian jade fruits was sweet and melted in his mouth, leaving no residue behind. It was as clear as the clouds in the sky, and its aura went straight into his internal organs, making him feel warm and comfortable all over. As the hot air rushed into his spiritual ocean, Wu Qi's divine soul opened its mouth and sucked it in. Shockingly, his divine soul was strengthened by about 30%. The purpose of the Langxian jade fruits was to strengthen one's soul and nourish one's fleshly body, so it could prolong one's life. Seeing that Changqin did not take these rare fruits seriously, Wu Qi pondered for a moment and realized that it was true. Legend had it that these fruits originated from Mount Kunlun, and now that Mount Kunlun had become the Kunlun Heavenly Pass under Changqin's control, the fruits that were regarded as treasures by others were no different from rice to him. Having figured this out, Wu Qi did not hold back anymore. He chewed and munched on a dozen fruits with different effects in a row. Ao Buzan's mouth watered as he watched. In front of Changqin, Ao Buzan poked his head out from Wu Qi's forehead and drooled 3 feet long. Changqin was amused. He gently clapped his hands, and 2 more girls brought a large basin of fruits and placed them before Wu Qi. Looking at Ao Buzan, Changqin said with a smile, "This is an ancient true dragon, isn't it? I can't believe you have 2 dragon pythons of fire and ice. Marquis of East Sea is really lucky. Don't stand on ceremony, these fruits are nothing to me." Ao Buzan gave a long, joyful hiss, then nodded at Changqin and said, "I've long heard that Prince Changqin is a distinguished, handsome, generous, and chivalrous man. Now that I've seen you today, you truly live up to your reputation. Hee, Lao Tzu, I won't stand on ceremony." Opening his mouth wide, Ao Buzan rushed into the basin and devoured the fruits happily. The dragon python sisters sprung into the basin as well, devouring the fruits even faster than Ao Buzan. As they were all ancient species, they had all kinds of knowledge passed down in their bloodlines, so they knew very well about the benefits of these fruits. Smiling at Ao Buzan and the others, Changqin nodded at Wu Qi and said, "I have brought Marquis of East Sea to the Ghost Realm because I have a request." Wu Qi bowed to Changqin and said, "Just tell me what you need, Crown Prince." As a subject of Diu Tan Lang, Changqin laughed, waved his hand, shook his head, and said, "You're wrong, you're wrong. Although Marquis of East Sea is a subject of Diu, but I—" He paused for a brief moment, then nodded and said, "I'm not the monarch of Diu, nor am I the superior of Marquis of East Sea. I have no subordinate relationship with you. So, if I need your help, Marquis of East Sea, it's only natural that I say please." Wu Qi gave Changqin a surprised look, then nodded and said, "If that's the case, just tell me what you need, Crown Prince." Changqin smiled and began to tell the story. Mount Kunlun, where Wu Qi lived, was the legendary Mount Kunlun that Wu Qi knew. It was the residence of the ancient gods, and later became the temporary imperial residence of the Yellow Emperor Xinyuan. But, after several apocalypses of heaven and earth in ancient times, great changes had taken place between heaven and earth. The Yellow Emperor Xinyuan uprooted Mount Kunlun with his mighty divine ability and threw it into the Ghost Realm, forcibly occupying a piece of territory in the Ghost Realm and leaving it under Prince Changqin's command. Naturally, the many ghost kings and ghost saints in the Ghost Realm hated Kunlun Heavenly Pass very much. Over the years, they had come up with countless ideas to throw Mount Kunlun back to Pangu continent. But Kunlun Heavenly Pass was a realm of its own. If those ghost kings and ghost saints broke into Mount Kunlun, they would lose the geographical advantage of the Ghost Realm and would be beaten black and blue by Prince Changqin. Because of that, Prince Changqin made a name for himself in the Ghost Realm. In addition to deterring all the powers in the Ghost Realm and exploiting all kinds of rare specialties, Kunlun Heavenly Pass was also responsible for monitoring all parties. The Ghost Realm was located in a very strange location. In layman's terms, it was the thoroughfare of the 9 provinces, a node where the power of space and time intertwined. From there, one could easily travel to other worlds, be it the Celestial Court, Pangu continent, the chaotic void in the outer heavenly realms, the Fiend Realm, the Demon Realm, and the Yellow Springs. Changqin kept watch over Kunlun Heavenly Pass with the Mirror of Kunlun, an ancient, extraordinary treasure that could illuminate the 33 heavens at all times, and keep an eye on the movements in the 9 heavens, the Yellow Springs, and all the other worlds. If there was any change, especially one that targeted the human race on Pangu continent, he could immediately send the information back to the Yellow Emperor Xinyuan and the Imperial Court of Diyu to deal with it. Meanwhile, the hundreds of millions of soldiers stationed in Kunlun Heavenly Pass had become the vanguard army to deal with any changes. Compared to the various conflicts and entanglements that broke out in Kunlun Heavenly Pass, the harassment of myriad immortal alliance on Pangu continent was just a child's play. Over the past few days, Changqin suddenly discovered that some strange changes had taken place in the outer heavenly realms and a few other powerful places. Some well-prepared regions were destroyed, and a large number of spies were wiped out. There were also some strange changes taking place in other places. He wanted to send the news back to Pangu continent, but he found that the ghost realm had been completely sealed off. The 13 ghost kings and 400 ghost saints had joined forces to seal off the ghost realm. They had raised their myriad tribulations ghost eyes into the void and formed the myriad tribulations heavenly ghost lockdown formation, completely isolating the ghost realm from the outside world. The hundreds of blood-colored moons Wu Qi saw in the sky were not celestial bodies, but the eyes of those ghost kings and ghost saints. The moonlight that filled every corner of the ghost realm was the natal divine light cultivated by these ghost kings and ghost saints. Prince Changqin had tried all kinds of means of communication, but to no avail. Even the messengers he sent were killed by some unknown people on the way. He was confident that he could break through the seal and return to Pangu continent, but he could not leave Kunlun Heavenly Pass. All the restrictive spells in the entire pass were in his hands, and he was the soul of Mount Kunlun. If he left, Kunlun Heavenly Pass might be breached by the army of the ghost realm. The risk was too great, and he did not have the courage to rush out of the ghost realm to deliver the message. He took a deep breath and took a sip of wine, then said to Wu Qi with a solemn face, "No matter why the ghost kings and ghost saints sealed off the ghost realm, this unusual change must be aimed at the human race. Ma-Yi, can you be my messenger and deliver a letter to the sacred emperor and the human emperor on my behalf?" Wu Qi was slightly taken aback. Changqin had sent several waves of messengers, but they had all been killed. Did he think he was much stronger than his messengers? With a shake of his palm, a beam of green light shot out, and a star map appeared amidst it. "Please have a look, Marquis," he said in a deep voice. "This is the way I came up with to return to Pangu continent." Wu Qi's eyes went wide as he looked at the star map. Chapter 764. Prince Changqin stared at the star map in front of him and said coolly, "If I can't go through the ghost realm, I'll take a detour through the mortal world. Over the years, we've planted many pawns in the mortal world. Some were destroyed, but some are safe and sound. You can return to Pangu continent through one of them, and no one will be able to stop you." Wu Qi looked at Prince Changqin. In ancient times, the immortal Tao, Buddhist Tao, Ghost Tao, Fiend Tao, and all sorts of heretical Taos were collectively known as the 3,000 Great Taos, and they were formed from the lineage of human beings. In the beginning, these people of the 3,000 Great Taos had the human race in their hearts, and they fought alongside the human race to the death. After countless devastating wars, they eventually killed, suppressed, and expelled those formidable innate gods and powerful living beings, and finally, Pangu continent was ruled by the human race. There was a world in every grain of sand, and a mortal world in every flower. Under the gaze of all the gods and Buddhas, these humans, who had been stripped of their true forms, lived a humble life. But there was one lineage of human beings who had comprehended the Tao of cultivation from the mystic arts and divine abilities of the ancient gods and all sorts of living beings. They devoured the natural energy and stole the secrets of heaven and earth to nourish themselves, sacrificing the heavenly Tao to strengthen themselves, and sacrificing everything in the world to enrich themselves. Some of them cultivated their nascent divinity internally and their fleshly bodies externally by consuming the glow of the sun and drinking the air. Some cultivated their nascent divinity internally and their fleshly bodies externally. Some abandoned their fleshly bodies and used their souls to extract yin energy. These became the ghost Tao. And some tortured their fleshly bodies with all sorts of mystic arts and tempered their souls with all sorts of cruel techniques, and even abandoned their souls became the fiend Tao and other heretical Taos. For all the immortals, Buddhas, and other cultivators, the human race was formed by inheriting the great Taos of heaven and earth, and had fused with the fortune of heaven and earth. Therefore, they were protected by the heavenly Tao. In other words, they could use the human race and obtain the power of virtue from them, which was permitted by the heavenly Tao. The effects of virtue energy were extremely profound, and it possessed boundless miraculous effects. For example, it could help one resist inner demons and heavenly tribulations. On the earth where Wu Qi came from, the civilization of Atlantis was destroyed in this way. The legendary ancient Kunlun divine kingdom was also destroyed in this way. Even the Mayan civilization in the jungles of South America was still preserved. It was nothing more than their priests suddenly awakening the divine bloodline in their bloodline and suddenly having the strength to break the barrier of the mortal world and discover the truth of the world. Thus, they were mercilessly killed by the gods and Buddhas. The ghost immortals were delighted to discover that they could devour human souls to strengthen their own souls, and they could devour human flesh and blood to strengthen their cultivation. They could also gain more power by torturing and killing humans. Negative emotions such as fear, anxiety, and anger became the source of the ghost immortals' power. In the past, many ancient great sages joined hands to create humans, gathering the bloodline essence of countless divine beasts and divine birds to create the human race. Therefore, the human race was born to be the spirit of all living things. They inherited the great Tao of heaven and earth, and became one with the destiny of heaven and earth. They were the natural masters of this world. The world of mortals was just this kind of farm. Wu Qi stared at Chongqing and asked, "What is the mortal world?" The devil immortals were delighted to discover that the fleshly body and soul of the human race were simply a great treasure trove. They used the cruelest methods to torture the fleshly body and kill the human soul, breaking down the human soul and condensing all kinds of fiends from them, cultivating themselves into countless fiend clones, and from there, they could obtain supreme divine abilities. There were also various cruel methods to condense the sea of blood and extract the essence, which became a necessary cultivation technique for the devil path. Eventually, something that none of the human race could face happened. Therefore, some cultivators kept humans as pets, using all kinds of methods to gain virtues from them. For example, in a place where the land was barren for tens of thousands of miles, where the people of the human race had no way to live, a cultivator would painstakingly summon a heavy rain to save the people with an immortal spell. Naturally, the power of virtues would descend. Chongqing glanced at Wu Qi with a smile and said in a gentle voice, "You are a newcomer, so those ghost kings and ghost saints will not notice you. Most of them will keep their eyes on my old acquaintances. As your aura has not been touched by them, they can't track you with mystic arts. So, you have a 90% chance of success if you return to Pangu continent through the mortal world." Those ancient almighty experts had compressed, shattered, twisted, and pieced together the space where their Earth was located. So, the small space where the Earth was located contained not only the Earth that Wu Qi was familiar with, but also the other 839, 9999, 999 Earths. They coexisted in the same void, orbiting the same sun and the same moon. The carefully arranged stars shone on these 840 million mortal worlds at the same time. But as time went by, the orthodox experts of the human race gradually aged and died, while the immortals, Buddhas, ghost spirits, and fiend kings had an endless lifespan. They watched their former comrades, companions, and clansmen die of old age, and they finally realized that they were different from ordinary humans. The Big Dipper, the 6 stars of the Southern Dipper, the gold, wood, water, fire, earth, sun, and all the other stars were the stars that Wu Qi was so familiar with on Earth that he could draw them with his eyes closed. He stared blankly at the star map, and suddenly realized that something extraordinary was about to appear in front of him. There were 840 million mortal worlds on Earth, and they all existed together. It was just like the one-dimensional world, the two-dimensional world, the three-dimensional world, all the way to the 840 million dimensional worlds. All 840 million Earths were located in the same place in the void, but the living beings on them could never meet the people from other mortal worlds. Their history was created by those gods and Buddhas, their development was controlled by them, and their rise and fall were planned at will. Prince Chongqing's eyes were very warm, dispelling the chill that rose from the bottom of Wu Qi's heart. he shouted sternly. How could they do this? Immortals could obtain all kinds of magical cauldrons from the people of the human race, such as the body of Plain Lady and the body of Mystic Lady, which could greatly enhance one's cultivation base with a little use. There was even the body of Pure Een, which could help heaven immortals break through the realm of gold immortals, or gold immortals break through the bottleneck of the primordial realm. As for the Buddhas, they did not need to use human souls and flesh for anything. Except for a few Buddhist cultivators who had inherited the Tantric Buddhism, who needed to control a good furnace, the rest of the Buddhist cultivators only needed the enormous power of faith from their believers to condense relics and refine their golden bodies. A Buddhist cultivator with hundreds of millions of believers could become an arhat or bodhisattva in a short time, but a Buddhist cultivator without believers would have to spend countless reincarnations to achieve the same level of cultivation. At that time, not only did Pangu continent belong to the human race, but even the billions of planets formed from the countless broken fragments of Pangu continent in outer heavenly realms were ruled by the human race. Humans, immortals, and Buddhas coexisted peacefully, and together they ruled this wonderful universe. The magic of the Buddhist League and the divine abilities of the Taoist League were perfectly fused into one, and the mortal world, a pen for raising humans for personal gain, was formed. Prince Changqin looked gently at Wu Qi and said softly, "So, many years ago, we began to make some arrangements in the mortal world. The ancestor of King Yu Feng, the master you serve now, was one of the candidates in charge of carrying out this plan. Until today's King Yang Shan and King Yu Feng, they are all our people. But the human race was born weak. At that time, it was the ancient gods who ruled Pangu continent, those mighty divine beasts and fowls, and those formidable creatures born in the primal chaos. Humans were the wisest of all living beings, and their blood essence was a great tonic, while their faith could help some powerful beings form their souls for their cultivation. Then came the ancient war between humans and gods, which Wu Qi had already learned about. With great perseverance, the ancestors of the human race led the weak human race to rise from the primitive Pangu continent, gradually growing stronger and stronger, killing and expelling those mighty gods and living beings one by one. Among them, the humans who maintained the orthodox lineage of the human race practiced cultivation techniques such as Wu Qi's true body of heaven and earth scripture, which made them powerful but did not lose the foundation of the human race. Changqin frowned slightly and sighed with an unsightly expression, then shook his head and told Wu Qi a few things. Wu Qi was sweating profusely as he listened to the story. His body was shivering and his joints were producing cracking noises. But it was impossible for the humans in the mortal world to have any contact with the people in other mortal worlds. They were no longer the ordinary, fragile, short-lived, and puny human race. They had become a brand new race. Because of their endless lifespan, they gradually gained the leadership of the human race. After all the human elders of the same generation as them died of natural causes, they became the leaders of the human race, and then they took it for granted that they should be the leaders of the human race. Whenever the humans in a mortal world developed into a highly civilized period, and when the power they possessed was about to pose a threat to the gods and Buddhas, the gods and Buddhas would not hesitate to unleash a cataclysm to completely destroy the civilization. Then, the humans who were thrown into the primitive society would have to rebuild on the ruins of the broken civilization. A star map that Wu Qi was very familiar with appeared in front of him. The cultivation techniques of the immortals and Buddhas who ruled the human race came from the gods and living beings who had fallen or been expelled. They gradually discovered that the human race was not only the race they were born from, but also the blood essence, souls, and power of faith of the human race. Therefore, when humans were born, they were either captured and devoured, or kept in captivity and fooled. Their fates were unspeakable. They were born, grew old, fell sick, and died. Their myths and legends contain stories about Pangu continent, the ancient gods, and the origin of the human race. These were the memories left in the human bloodline, and even those almighty experts who had used supreme mystic arts could not erase them completely. With these fragmented memories about Pangu continent and their ancestors, they struggled to survive in the mortal worlds, going through the cycle of reincarnation, rising and falling generation after generation. The earth where Wu Qi was born was a part of the mortal worlds. Only those ancient almighty experts who created the world knew exactly how many mortal worlds there were. But over the years, Prince Changqin had peeped into them with the mirror of Kunlun, and he had discovered as many as 840 million of them. The 108 most powerful ancient Buddhas and 124 ancient primordial immortals had joined hands, using the bodies of 99,999 ancient gods and mighty living beings that had been killed as the materials, and these almighty experts had spent an eons of hard work to forge the mortal world. 840 million mortal worlds were just the ones Changqin had discovered over the years. In fact, how many mortal worlds were there in the world, and how many humans were being played by them? How could they do this? They were born human beings too. How could they be so cruel to those of the same origin? How could those lofty immortals, Buddhas, and other almighty experts do this? Chapter 765. Prince Changqin looked at Wu Qi and said something else. The immortals and Buddhas kept the human race captive in the mortal worlds, making them unaware of their origins and blinded their divine sense. They obediently became the reserve army for the immortals and Buddhas to choose their disciples, and became the production base for them to obtain all kinds of resources. Need disciples with excellent aptitude? Go to the mortal worlds to choose. Need talented cultivation vessels to pluck and nourish? Go to the mortal worlds to search. Need the power of faith to form relics? Go to the mortal worlds to preach. Need the power of virtue to resist the heavenly tribulation? Go to the mortal worlds to travel. In a word, the mortal worlds had almost become a necessity for the immortals and Buddhas to improve their cultivation bases and develop their sections. Only those almighty experts who had truly grasped the power of the universe and the great sects they had established could have their own territories in the mortal worlds. For example, the Lord Buddha, Amitabha, the Buddhist League he founded had at least 280 million worlds in the mortal worlds and countless followers. The power of faith of countless believers in the 280 million worlds was gathered together. 50% of the power of faith belonged to the Lord Buddha, Amitabha, and the other 50% belonged to the Buddhas, Bodhisattvas, Arhats, Vajras, heavenly kings, and other saints of Buddhism. With such a huge amount of power of faith gathered in Amitabha alone, his cultivation base had reached an unfathomable level. 90% of the living beings in the mortal worlds were created by the Buddhist League after controlling a small part of the power of the 6 paths of reincarnation, and then fusing the souls of those who had reincarnated in the 6 paths of reincarnation into the mortal worlds. According to the rules of the heavenly Tao, all the human beings in the 6 paths of reincarnation would be reborn on Pangu continent. But the Buddhist League controlled a part of the power of the 6 paths of reincarnation, and that was why the population of the mortal worlds did not decrease. On the contrary, as time went by, the population grew. The core essence of the preaching of immortals and Buddhas in the mortal worlds was that by believing in those immortals and Buddhas, one could transcend the mortal worlds and go to the Elysium or other worlds of great joy. If one believed in the way of Tao, one could ascend to the immortal realm. If one believed in Buddhism, one could go to the Elysium. The immortals and Buddhas had incredible means. If there were extremely devout believers in the mortal worlds, their souls would be branded by their faith. Once they died, their souls would enter the 6 paths of reincarnation, and those who were branded in their souls would be guided by the Buddhist League to the outer heavenly realms to be reincarnated, retaining all their memories from when they were alive. When they were suddenly reincarnated from the filthy mortal worlds into outer heavenly realms with abundant natural energy and natural treasures, they were born. The Buddhas, the followers, and the Buddhas, they believed even more. These fanatics lived and multiplied in the outer heavenly realms. Because of their excellent aptitude, they became the best source of disciples for immortals and Buddhas, or when they died of natural causes, they were taken to their own Buddhist kingdoms by the almighty experts of the Buddhist League and became their sons of Buddha, providing the power of faith to the almighty experts of the Buddhist League day and night. Qi of Chang Chang. Chang Chang Chin Chang. and qi in stones, and said, "The king race and Chang Chang of gods and the king kings, and in of the living in cultive, and the emperor god Qi, saint." As the leaders of the human race, how can we tolerate such behavior? The Yellow Emperor Xianyuan, the Yen Emperor Shennong, and the ancient emperors of the human race, including Xuanxu, Taihao, and Xiaohao, could not tolerate such things. Therefore, they had been fighting against the immortals and Buddhas in the sky. Prince Changqin, who presided over the ghost realm and secretly spied on the mortal worlds, had naturally become the vanguard of the various intentions of the almighty experts behind the human race. For a long time, he had joined hands with some powerful figures in De Yu's dynasty, quietly developing his power in the mortal worlds and fighting against the immortals and Buddhas. Just like the people of the Six States and Xiangyu, the hegemon king of Western Chu, they were all heroes of their time, and King Yangshan had set his eyes on their pawns. More than 2,000 years ago, their fights and killings were all secretly controlled by King Yangshan. After Ing Zheng, the Qin emperor, unified the world, King Yangshan was about to reveal his identity and ask Ing Zheng to submit to De Yu, so that he could truly become one of De Yu's generals on earth. However, the counterattack of the celestial court came roaring down like a thunderstorm. With all kinds of means, Ing Zheng was killed, Zhao Gao rebelled, Li Si fell into chaos, the crown prince Fu Su was killed by the immortals, and the ignorant Hu Hai was placed on the throne. King Yangshan was so furious that he immediately secretly supported Xiangyu to conquer the world again. But Liu Bang, the son of a certain celestial emperor in the celestial court, reincarnated into a human, joined forces with Zhang Liang and others, who also had an immortal background, and defeated Xiangyu in the Battle of Gaixia. Xiangyu was killed by Zhang Liang and others with immortal magic. If not for King Yangshan's help, Xiangyu's soul would have long been destroyed, and he would never have had the chance to rise again on Myriad Immortals' planet. Seeing that the immortals were too powerful, King Yangshan, who knew he could not fight them head-on in the mortal worlds, had no choice but to take the souls of the heroes of the six dynasties, as well as Xiangyu, and bring them to Myriad Immortals' planet which he had prepared in advance. There, he reforged their bodies and let them continue to develop from scratch. These people were all heroes, and King Yangshan had controlled their souls with restrictive spells so that he could use them as spies to hurt others in the future. As Prince Changqin told the story, Wu Qi made a general deduction about why the heroes of the six dynasties appeared on Myriad Immortals' planet. Not only on the Earth that Wu Qi was familiar with, but also in the other mortal worlds, De Yu's men were secretly operating. When the Buddhas spread their faith of immortals and Buddhas, De Yu's men destroyed their faith to their heart's content. Whenever there was any major turmoil in those mortal worlds, it would be caused by the pawns arranged by De Yu's men. In the long run, the activities of De Yu's men in the mortal worlds would become what the immortals and Buddhas called the sabotage of demons and devils from outer heavenly realms. But the mortal worlds were, after all, jointly created by the immortals and Buddhas, and all the laws in them were under their control. Prince Changqin and others had worked hard for countless years, but their achievements in the mortal worlds were still few and far between. Although they had unearthed many outstanding talents from the mortal worlds and sabotaged many of the immortals and Buddha's operations, compared to their efforts, the returns were undoubtedly meager. After all, none of their operations had caused any damage to the mortal worlds, and they could not be considered to have achieved anything. Over the years, in addition to some targeted operations against the preaching of the immortals and Buddhas in the mortal worlds, the biggest achievement of Prince Changqin and others was to construct some ultra-long-distance teleportation formations in the mortal worlds that led directly to Pangu continent. With these formations, one could break through all kinds of restrictive spells in the mortal worlds and reach Pangu continent, as well as reach certain specific locations in the mortal worlds from Pangu continent. Surrounding these great void teleportation formations, the two sides continued to fight in secret. The immortals and Buddha's disciples in the mortal worlds were desperately trying to destroy these formations, while the men sent by De Yu seemed to be addicted to building such secret formations everywhere. Most of the time, The construction and destruction of these formations no longer had any strategic significance and had become purely a tool for both sides to vent their anger. As Prince Changqin explained, he brought Wu Qi to a simple and unadorned hall made of bronze in Mount Kunlun. Inside the spacious hall, a bronze pedestal with 9 dragons coiled around it stood majestically, while an oval blue wheel made of unknown materials, 3,000 feet tall and 100 feet thick, rested firmly on the pedestal. Smoke and clouds flickered on its dark blue surface, giving a panoramic view of the mortal worlds. Pointing at the mirror, Changqin said in a deep voice, "This is the mirror of Kunlun, born in the primordial chaos, with a mighty divine ability that can break through all barriers in the void. It's a pity that my cultivation base is not strong enough, so I can only borrow part of its power." Gently stroking the pedestal of the mirror of Kunlun, Wu Qi looked at the huge mirror and asked, "What if I want to completely master it?" Changqin turned to give Wu Qi a look, pondered for a moment, then shook his head and said, "I suppose I need an overall strength beyond the realm of primordial? After all, it is the most powerful supreme treasure of primordial that even a first-tier primordial immortal could not truly master. But, an overall strength beyond the realm of primordial? Tiske, is there anyone like that in the universe?" An overall strength beyond the first-tier primordial immortal was also beyond the realm of primordial. Heaven immortals could borrow the power of the laws of heaven and earth. Gold immortals could distort the laws of heaven and earth. Primordial immortals could destroy or create new laws of heaven and earth. So, what was the realm beyond the realm of primordial? Wu Qi could not imagine it, and judging from Changqin's expression, he seemed to doubt this statement as well. After all, it was a legendary realm. Beyond the realm of primordial? Did such a person really exist today? Take the current Lord Buddha, Amitabha, for example. As the Lord of countless Buddhas and the leader of the Buddhist League, it was said that he had just stepped into the realm of first-tier primordial immortal. There were no more than 10 people in the universe who could stand shoulder to shoulder with Amitabha, and they were the top group of people in the universe. A realm beyond the realm of primordial? Did such a person really exist? Shaking his head, Wu Qi heaved a long sigh, then looked at Changqin in confusion and said, "Crown Prince, are you going to use the mirror of Kunlun when you brought Tan Lang here?" Changqin nodded and said, "Yes, I'm going to use its power to send you to the mortal worlds. The mirror of Kunlun is extremely mysterious, and although I can only borrow part of its power, I've made it the hub of all the teleportation formations in the mortal worlds." With a flick of his finger, plumes of smoke rose from the mirror of Kunlun, with countless star maps flashing rapidly amidst them. In a moment, Marquis, you'll choose one of the worlds to go to, and the location of all the teleportation formations in that world will appear in your divine sense, said Changqin in a deep voice. Once you're in that world, you'll be able to use the teleportation formations there to return to Pangu continent. Looking at the gleaming mirror of Kunlun, Wu Qi suddenly thought of something. Was there another teleportation formation on Earth? If there was, Wu Qi would not mind making a trip to Earth. It was time to settle some of the old scores. After pondering for a brief moment, Wu Qi nodded and said, "Please bring Tan Lang's subordinates here, Crown Prince. Tan Lang will put them in the Supreme Tower and bring them with him." Changqin nodded and smiled, then fished out 3 jade slips from under his sleeve, 1 black and 2 white, and handed them to Wu Qi. The black jade slip records the sacred emperor's residence and the way to enter and leave, while the white jade slip records the recent unusual movements I've discovered. Please send them to the sacred emperor and the human emperor as soon as possible, Mar. Wu Qi cupped his fist and bowed to Changqin. Chapter 766. Prince Changqin glanced at Wu Qi, then nodded with a smile and said, "Although we have a 90% chance of success, there are still risks. It's not right to ask you to take this risk for no reason. You have the Supreme Tower, so it goes without saying that you can attack and defend at the same time. The true body of heaven and earth scripture is already one of the best body tempering techniques in the universe, and the dragon kill can be used in both melee and long-range attacks. In a pitch-black great hall on a great mountain in the depths of the ghost realm, 13 great heavenly ghost kings and 400 ghost saints were sitting cross-legged on a group of black stone pillars of different heights. When Wu Qi was sucked into the mirror of Kunlun, several great heavenly ghost kings suddenly opened their eyes and let out deep hisses. This was the teleportation formation in the Antarctic Xianbing. As long as Wu Qi followed the information from the mirror of Kunlun and changed the coordinates of the formation to one of the 13 corresponding coordinates on Pangu continent, he would be able to return to Pangu continent without a hitch. Amidst the laughter of the ghosts, the faces of the 3 Buddhas sitting on 3 glowing lotus thrones in the void outside the ghost realm turned extremely unsightly. They stared blankly at the ghost realm shrouded in thick clouds of dark mist, their benevolent and dignified faces filled with ugly, awkward smiles. A faint beam of light flashed in the distance and then disappeared without a trace. In the next moment, 3 huge golden palms were hovering in front of the 3 Buddhas. The index finger of one of the palms was broken by something, emitting a faint golden glow. His divine sense had locked onto the small planet, and the information that followed made Wu Qi understand that there were originally 7 teleportation formations on this planet, but 2 of them were destroyed 1,000 years ago, and 1 more than a decade ago. Now, only 4 of them remained intact. Dark Ean's celestial tower was a treasure that Wu Qi had nourished with his natal energy, so he naturally could not use it to fight the enemy. The blood centipede sword was used to kill, and once unleashed, it would cause blood to flow for thousands of miles. Although it was powerful, its killing intent was too strong. Only the worldly phenomenon tablet contained boundless profundities. It could be used to kill, trap, attack, and defend. Once used properly, it was much stronger than other treasures. With a casual wave of his hand, a square-shaped jade medallion flew out of his hand and fell into Wu Qi's hand along with wisps of spiritual light. He shouted in a low voice, "Martial Uncle, I'm back." Wu Qi realized that the teleportation formation that was destroyed 1,000 years ago should be the one that brought him to Pangu continent, not to mention the one that was destroyed 12 years ago. Of the remaining 4 teleportation formations, 2 were located near the North and South Poles, 1 was located in the depths of the Pacific Ocean, and the last one was located in the Earth Fire Poison Cave at the center of Mount Ame. He glanced at Prince Changqin and knew that he had activated some mysterious function of the Mirror of Kunlun, using this mysterious power that contained a very strong innate aura to purify his divine soul. Judging by the prince's flushed face as he performed a hand incantation gesture with both hands, he knew that it was a great burden on him to activate this power. Even so, Wu Qi's divine soul trembled violently as the information was rapidly injected into it. He felt waves of pain in his divine soul, and cold sweat broke out all over Wu Qi's body as he almost screamed in pain. Just then, a beam of silver light sprinkled down from the mirror of Kunlun and gently enveloped Wu Qi's body. Wu Qi, whose divine soul was almost unable to withstand the impact, felt a refreshing coolness all over his body as an unfathomable and mysterious power penetrated into his divine soul. Instinctively, Wu Qi noticed that his divine soul had become more pliable and strong, and the pain had vanished without a trace. Prince Changqin was sweating profusely as he staggered back a few steps and retracted his hand incantation gesture while trembling all over. Looking at the mirror of Kunlun, which had gradually calmed down, he murmured in a low voice, "Marquis of East Sea, I hope you're safe and sound." With a thought in his mind, Wu Qi cupped his fist and bowed to Changqin, then injected his divine will into the endless whirlpool of starlight in the mirror of Kunlun. Wu Qi's body was shrouded in a silvery light, and a tremendous suction force rushed out of the mirror of Kunlun. Wu Qi's body turned into a very fine beam of silver light and plunged into the mirror, disappearing in the blink of an eye. Plumes of smoke and clouds billowed out of the mirror of Kunlun, while countless star maps spun rapidly and transformed into a whirlpool of starlight that rumbled and rumbled in front of Wu Qi. As soon as Wu Qi sent a wisp of divine will into the star map, the situation of the 840 million mortal worlds mastered by Prince Changqin immediately rushed into Wu Qi's spiritual ocean like a tide. If it had not been for the fact that Wu Qi had formed an innate chaotic divine soul and his divine will had been strengthened several times, The influx of information alone would have crushed his divine soul. A clear divine will was sent into Wu Qi's divine will, and he instantly understood the origin and usage of the jade medallion. Today, the island was heavily guarded, and burly men in uniforms and armed to the teeth could be seen patrolling among the greenery. Small vehicles of strange shapes dragged mobile missile launchers back and forth, while several radar antennas were erected on the mountaintop in the middle of the island. Wu Qi, who had transformed into a beam of silver light, first felt his body become heavy, and a great suction force came from all directions. But he sped up abruptly, and the suction force was easily thrown to the back of his mind. Then, a great sheet of golden light came crashing down from above, and a terrible pressure nearly crushed Wu Qi, who had transformed into a beam of silver light. Fortunately, the silver light wrapped around him suddenly lit up, and in the blink of an eye, he tore through the golden light and sped forward. Keeping Changqin's kindness in mind, Wu Qi's divine soul became many times more lively and active than usual under the illumination of the silver light. He easily found the information of the earth where he was born among the information of these mortal worlds, and was delighted to find that there were still 4 places on this earth that were still glowing with red light. 4 spatial teleportation formations were still intact. But before long, a ghost king suddenly laughed and said, "If he is not going to Pangu continent, why are we wasting the effort to stop him? Don't you see that even those 3 ghost kings failed to stop him? Why are we wasting the effort?" Wu Qi chuckled and casually thrust his palm out, vanishing the black door in front of him in an instant. It was still the same antique building with green tiles and green bricks. On the plaque hanging over the lintel of the door were 5 dazzling golden characters on a black background. Underhand sect. The 5 flamboyant characters were so arrogant, baring their fangs and brandishing their claws, that they looked like 5 evil dragons coiling on the plaque. Although Changqin had given such an important treasure to Wu Qi as a reward for Wu Qi's help in delivering the letters, Wu Qi owed Changqin too much, so he had no choice but to desperately deliver the 2 letters to Emperor Xianyuan and Emperor Haozuan. As a direct descendant of Emperor Zhuanshu, the natural phenomena medallion was used by Changqin to protect him when he was young. With his formidable cultivation base and the mirror of Kunlun guarding Kunlun Heavenly Pass, the natural phenomena medallion was of no use to him. But for Wu Qi, it was an extraordinary treasure. Changqin walked slowly out of the great hall and looked up at the faint dark clouds and mist that shrouded Mount Kunlun. His long eyebrows twitched slightly as he cried out in a low voice, "Someone, deliver my order. Strike the thunder drums 30,000 times and drive away all the spies in the vicinity." Wu Qi's face flickered. With a sway of his body, he was already in front of the gate of the underhand sect's headquarters. But Wu Qi was not in a hurry to strike. Instead, he scanned the whole planet with his divine sense, then vanished without a trace. "Crown Prince, Tan Lang is ready." The current island did not look like the headquarters of a Jianghu sect at all. It was clearly a heavily guarded military base. In just a few seconds, the silver starlight around him suddenly disappeared, and Wu Qi felt a faint chill coming at him from all directions. In the next moment he found himself in a thick blue xianbing. It was a circular cave thousands of feet in diameter. A teleportation formation made up of hundreds of giant jade tablets was hovering in the middle of the cave, all of them gleaming faintly. Before long, a deafening rumble that sounded like hundreds of thousands of thunderbolts bursting out at the same time rang out from within Mount Kunlun. The sound wave swept out in all directions, accompanied by ear-piercing screams. Countless dark shadows rushed out of the air around Mount Kunlun, fleeing in all directions with their hands covering their ears. After branding the various incantations of controlling the natural phenomena medallion in the depths of his divine soul, Wu Qi flipped his hand and put the medallion back into his body, then bowed respectfully to Prince Changqin. Although the natural phenomena medallion was an artifact crafted by Emperor Zhuanshu, the materials it was made of were extremely rare innate spirit items, whose quality was not inferior to Wu Qi's blood centipede sword. It was also an innate spirit artifact. After a long while, one of the Buddhas in the center cried out in a low voice, "Order all the guardians in the mortal worlds to kill this man." We must not let him return to Pangu continent through the mortal worlds. This was a natural phenomena medallion, personally crafted by Emperor Zhuanxu, one of the ancient emperors. It contained infinite mysteries, and had the great power to contain the universe and evolve the primordial era. It was one of the secret treasures inherited by the human race, and could only be activated by Pangu's sacred energy. If an immortal dared to inject his immortal energy into it, the only outcome would be being turned into ashes by the backlash. Wu Qi could not help but sigh in his heart that Prince Chongqing was a kind man, so kind that Wu Qi felt a little embarrassed. This was the earth where Wu Qi was born. After pondering for a moment, Prince Chongqing smiled and said, "Well, here's a little toy for you to protect yourself with." The jade medallion was 1 foot and 8 inches long, 6 and 3 inches wide, and 3 inches thick. The white medallion was carved with countless images of earth, water, fire, wind, rain, thunder, and even the sun, the moon, and the stars. At first glance, the medallion was crystal clear and glittering, as if all the images were flowing. The natural phenomena engraved on the medallion were so real that even with Wu Qi's mighty divine sense, he could not tell how many things were engraved on the tiny medallion. Wu Qi produced the Dark Yin Celestial Tower and swallowed the jade armor Dark Turtle flying ship, which carried Huang Liang and the others into it. In fact, he had moved the ship into his interstitial world, and knocked out Huang Liang and the others with a mental shock. After opening his mouth and breathing out a plume of purple smoke to swallow the pitch-black Dark Yin Celestial Tower, Wu Qi turned to look at Prince Chongqing. The natural phenomena medallion contained all kinds of celestial phenomena in the universe. As long as one's cultivation base was high enough, one could conjure all kinds of powerful forces of heaven and earth from the medallion to attack the enemy or defend oneself. When one's cultivation base reached a very profound level, this natural phenomena medallion could conjure a void of its own, and naturally lay down the natural phenomena formation, which could trap or kill with just a thought. When the light faded, Wu Qi appeared over a small island in Indonesia. This was where the headquarters of the Underhand sect was located, and where Wu Qi spent his childhood and youth. It was a place that left a deep impression on him, and was equivalent to home in his heart. Chapter 767. When he was in the ice cave in the South Pole, Wu Qi scanned the earth with his divine sense and was surprised to find out that the man in charge of the Underhand sect's headquarters was none other than his archenemy, Shangguanyi. The Underhand sect no longer had the same goal as before. Under Shangguanye's leadership, they had become an underground ruler who secretly controlled the entire Nanyang region. What surprised Wu Qi the most was that Shangguanye's cultivation had reached the core formation realm, and he was only one step away from forming the golden core. When Wu Qi's divine sense locked onto Shangguanyi, he was indulging in debauchery in the Underhand sect's headquarters, having sex with a few beautiful girls with skin whiter than snow. After smashing the main entrance of the Underhand sect's headquarters with a single palm strike, the alarm immediately rang, and countless heavily armed men rushed over from all directions. A sharp rebuke was heard coming from the loudspeakers erected on the high ground. In the airfield behind a few hills in the distance, dozens of armed helicopters with streamlined bodies were taking off at top speed, flying straight towards Wu Qi. Along with the sound of gun bolts being pulled, nearly 1,000 men surrounded Wu Qi. More than 50 military helicopters were circling above him in the sky, with all kinds of anti-ground missiles hanging on their wings glinting faintly under the sunlight. Wu Qi looked at the helicopters as if nothing had happened. The maximum power of these missiles was only equivalent to the full power of a core formation cultivator, and to him, it was not even enough to scratch an itch. Even the strongest thermonuclear weapon on Earth, the hydrogen bomb, which weighed tens of millions of tons, was only equivalent to the full power of a 36th-tier heaven immortal. This was the limit of power that humans in the mortal world could possess. How could Wu Qi take these weapons seriously? The mortal world was created by the ancient Buddhas and primordial immortals using the bodies of fallen ancient fiend gods and some natural treasures. It was a tool for them to raise humans. Humans in the mortal world could not possess too much power, And the thermonuclear weapon was the most extreme power they could possess. As if nothing had happened, Wu Qi glanced at those men who were on high alert, then sighed and said, "Sheng Guanyi, are you still not coming out?" A deep laughter could be heard coming from afar. Sheng Guanyi, who was calm and composed, had put on a set of black training clothes, and was surrounded by dozens of middle-aged men as he swaggered out. Sheng Guanyi, who was staring at the sky, let out a cold and arrogant laugh and said, "Since you're able to sneak into this place and destroy the main entrance of my underhand sect, I can see that you're quite capable. Unfortunately, these abilities are not enough. I'll give you two options." Snorting coldly, Sheng Guanyi stretched out two fingers and said, "1. Submit to me obediently, and you'll be able to enjoy endless glory and wealth in the future. As for the last one, kill yourself so that you don't fall into my hands and suffer the endless torture." Wu Qi sighed, shook his head, and returned to his original appearance. It had been nearly 20 years, but Wu Qi's appearance hadn't changed much. Apart from his aura and temperament that had matured a lot, his face was still the same as before. The passage of time did not leave any trace on his face. For someone like him who had the cultivation base of a golden immortal, time was powerless against him. Wu Qi, who was wearing the Diyu uniform, had his hands clasped behind his back. His long hair was gently fluttering in the sea breeze behind his back. He squinted at Sheng Guanyi and sighed, "Sheng Guanyi, do you still remember me? How did you survive the Machu Picchu explosion back then?" Sheng Guanyi stared blankly at Wu Qi, who had returned to his original appearance. He kept blinking his eyes as if he couldn't believe what he was seeing. At the same time, he was trying to recall who this face belonged to. After a quarter of an hour, he finally asked hesitantly, Is it Wu Qi? You're still alive, you son of a bitch? How could you still be alive?" All of a sudden, Sheng Guanyi roared hysterically. He pointed at Wu Qi and yelled, "How could you still be alive? In the past, the Lord of Tao used the talisman given by the immortals to travel back in time. Only then was he able to reform our bodies and souls, even though we had been destroyed by the explosion. You're just 3 mortals, and you were dragged into the grand universal teleportation formation. How could you still be alive?" With his hands clasped behind his back, Wu Qi stared at Sheng Guanyi coldly. He waited for him to calm down, then said indifferently, "Master and Xiaobai, they're dead. Their souls have merged with mine, and will never be separated again in this life. I thought I'd never have the chance to see you again, but the heavens have eyes, and I'm finally back." The strange atmosphere between Wu Qi and Sheng Guanyi made all the armed men in the surroundings tense up. Wu Qi's strange tone made a few of the men who had their guns pointed at Wu Qi cramp their fingers, and they immediately pulled the trigger. When the gunshots rang out, over 1,000 men who were aiming at Wu Qi pulled the triggers at the same time, sending countless bullets whistling towards Wu Qi. Sheng Guanyi had a hideous smile on his face, but his smile turned into extreme shock in the blink of an eye. A circle of faint black flame burst out from Wu Qi's body, and all the bullets that got close to him were devoured and corroded by the black flame. Not a single bullet could get close to his body. The helicopters in the sky had also unleashed 36 waves of missiles, and over 50 of them had unleashed over 1,000 air-to-ground missiles at the same time. Raging flames and smoke blanketed Wu Qi's body, and the scorching flames converged into a blinding white light that enveloped him. But the purgatory demonic flame around Wu Qi's body started rolling, and all the flames and shrapnel were devoured and melted by the black flame. Even the sound of the missiles exploding was devoured by the black flame. The sound of more than 1,000 air-to-ground missiles exploding was actually about the same as the sound of firecrackers. The situation on the battlefield was simply extremely strange. Lightly clapping his palms, Wu Qi said coldly, "So many years have passed, and the arms of those black market traffickers have not improved at all? I can't blame you, as how could those animals that were raised in captivity give you so much improvement? Not bad, the power of these missiles is slightly stronger than a full-force attack from a core condensation cultivator. Not bad." Sheng Guanyi's eyeballs almost popped out from his eye sockets. He looked at Wu Qi in horror, and subconsciously took a dozen steps back. Everyone on the scene backed off in panic, because they saw something unbelievable. After being shot by thousands of missiles, not only did Wu Qi not suffer any injuries, even the ground around him was not affected by the explosions. It was as if the black flame around him was a bottomless black hole that devoured all the explosive power and shrapnel. Amidst the hurried cries of alarm, the fiend flame of purgatory around Wu Qi transformed into tens of thousands of spirit snakes and shot out. They tore through the air with shrill whistling noises and hit the bodies of the armed men, burning them into balls of pitch-black flame. The blazing fireballs flew everywhere, and heart-wrenching screams could be heard from every corner of the island. Under the scanning of Wu Qi's powerful divine sense, nothing that happened in the underground bases deep within the island could escape Wu Qi's eyes. Countless snakes formed by the black flames pierced through the thick rock layers of the island and burned into the underground bases below. The armed men who were busy working near the submarines and small warships were screaming in fear. The flames were burning fiercely, and not long after that, a loud explosion could be heard from the bottom of the island. It was the sound of the ammunition and fuel stored deep within the island being detonated. In the blink of an eye, the tens of thousands of armed men on the island were killed by Wu Qi. Only Shangguan Yi and the dozens of middle-aged men behind him were left. Wu Qi gently patted on Ao Buzan's shoulder. Ao Buzan, who had long lost control of his killing intent, let out a deep dragon roar. He suddenly transformed into a giant black dragon that was hundreds of feet long, opened his mouth and swallowed a middle-aged man beside Shangguan Yi. Along with the sound of chewing, a large amount of blood flowed down from the corner of Ao Buzan's mouth. He squinted his eyes and stared at Shangguan Yi, chuckled and said, "Hee hee, Lao Tzu would never have thought that my lord was actually born in the mortal world." Wu Qi patted Ao Buzan's slightly protruding belly, then smiled at Shangguan Yi and the others, who were dumbfounded, and said, "If I may ask, where did all the elders and fellow disciples of the underhand sect go?" Shangguan Yi's body was trembling. He said with a trembling voice, all dead." Wu Qi furrowed his brows and asked in a deep voice, "All dead?" A middle-aged man beside Shangguan Yi suddenly knelt on the ground and screamed, "This was all done by sect leader Shangguan. He said that those elders and disciples didn't help him when he was in trouble, so he asked Miao Yuan to kill them all. This has nothing to do with us." Wu Qi's unfathomable methods, as well as the sudden appearance of the legendary real dragon, had scared Shangguan Yi and the others so much that their minds went blank. Without Wu Qi asking, they told him everything in detail. All in all, the underhand sect today was no longer the underhand sect that Wu Qi was familiar with. All the disciples that Wu Qi was familiar with had been killed in Shangguan Yi's Great Purge. The current underhand sect had become a tool for Miao Yuan to control the South Sea and to plunder all kinds of natural treasures. It had become a tool to serve his own personal interests, and it no longer had the original purpose of the underhand sect. Wu Qi lowered his head and pondered for a moment, then shook his head. He casually waved his hand towards the underhand sect's main altar. Along with an ear-piercing sound, a tattered wooden plaque flew out from the altar. This was the ancestral plaque of the underhand sect. After Shangguan Yi had purged the entire sect, this ancestral white wooden plaque was thrown away in the storeroom to gather dust, and was replaced by this huge golden plaque. Gently rubbing the wooden plaque that had accompanied the underhand sect for many years, Wu Qi said in an indifferent tone, "Uncle Master Shangguan, I've rebuilt the underhand sect on Pangu continent. Once I've massacred Green City, I'll bring this plaque to Pangu continent and place it at the entrance of the underhand sect I've built." With a relaxed smile, Wu Qi shook his head and said, "The descendants of the underhand sect will not die, but you will die." Shangguan Yi was startled. He roared and retreated at top speed, but how could Wu Qi let him escape? The blood centipede sword tore through the air with a sharp whistling sound. A beam of blood-red light swept out, cutting Shangguan Yi and the people around him in half at the waist. All the hills and forests on the island were broken and shattered by the sword's ferocious sword energy. He casually struck down, unleashing a bolt of thunder that turned the entire island into ashes and sank to the bottom of the ocean. With a sway of his body, Wu Qi had crossed thousands of miles in the blink of an eye and arrived above Green City. Taoist Miao Yuan, an old friend has come to visit. Why aren't you coming to see me? Wu Qi patted his battle robe and changed it into an ordinary Taoist robe, while he stuffed Ao Buzan and the dragon python sisters into his sleeve. A deep bell toll rang out from the deep valley behind Green City, and a dozen white sword beams cut through the clouds and approached. Chapter 768. The leading white sword beam moved nimbly like a snake, gliding lightly over the thin layer of clouds and approaching Wu Qi. A young Taoist amidst the sword beam cried out, "May I ask which fellow Taoist has come to visit us? What business do you have with Uncle Master Miao Yuan?" A blood-red gleam flashed across Wu Qi's eyes as he stared at the approaching sword beam. Incense smoke drifted in the air in front of Mount Qingqing. Countless believers were shuttling back and forth between the Taoist temples and monasteries. Taoists and monks, both real and fake, were selling all kinds of talismans and ornaments to pilgrims, believers, pedestrians, and tourists, while some rich people were offering generous incense money in the Great Hall. It was a scene of prosperity and peace. But behind Mount Qingqing, a faint killing intent lingered between heaven and earth. Wu Qi's killing intent had enveloped the entire back of the mountain. Narrowing his eyes at the dozens of incoming sword beams, he sighed and said in a low voice, "I'm here to kill, not to make friends with you. I found you, Taoist Miao Yuan." With a casual wave, the blood centipede sword turned into numerous blood threads and fell from the sky, which transformed into a large net of light that wrapped around the dozen white sword beams. As Wu Qi's mind turned inward, the sword beams shattered, and the Taoists in the sword beams let out cries of horror and despair. Countless pieces of flesh and bones, no more than an inch in circumference, sprayed out along with a great deal of blood. The Taoists' souls were torn to pieces by the blood centipede sword. "Why don't you come out and see me, Taoist Miao Yuan?" "Huh, you actually have an immortal talisman bestowed by an immortal? An immortal talisman that can trace back time? You are really lucky." Wu Qi laughed in a deep voice. His laughter was not loud, but it easily spread through all the caves and blessed lands in the back of the mountain, as well as all the Taoist temples hidden in the rocks, streams, and valleys. A deep bell chime rang out, and from the peaks of many peaks in the back mountain of Qingqing, plumes of clouds rose high into the sky, transforming into a dense cloud barrier that enveloped the entire back mountain in the blink of an eye. Colorful Buddha light and immortal light were swirling above the cloud barrier. On the cliffs of the front mountain of Qing City, countless tourists were exclaiming at the same time. They took out all kinds of cameras and other things to take pictures of the rare scene. They had no idea of the terrible killing intent hidden in the magnificent scene, or the great danger lurking behind the light. Wu Qi floated in midair, not moving at all, allowing the mountain guarding formation at the back of Qingqing Mountain to pull him in. Spirit light flowed ceaselessly in the depths of the white clouds. The clouds around Wu Qi tumbled and rolled, dragging him into the most powerful formation gate of the defensive formation in the back mountain of Qing City. White clouds coiled around the mountain, and only a dozen lofty peaks could be vaguely seen. Each peak was filled with Taoists in green robes and monks in yellow or red kasayas. Obviously, the Taoists in the back mountain of Qing City made up the majority. Among every 10 Taoists, there was only one Taoist. After all, Qing City was a holy land for Taoist League, and most of the cultivators living in seclusion in the back mountain were Taoists. The cloud that blotted the sky condensed into several dozens of huge cloud flags around Wu Qi. When the flags fluttered, a tremendous force came out of them, restraining Wu Qi's body, while a large sheet of spirit light transformed into countless flying swords, wheeling and wheeling around him. The flying swords formed from these spiritual lights were extremely cold and sharp, and they were no different from treasured swords forged from metal. Apart from the flags and the flying swords that could take lives, there was also a large patch of dark clouds hovering above Wu Qi's head, in which bolts of lightning could be vaguely seen gathering. Beneath his feet was a large patch of red cloud, from which blazing flames shot into the sky. The red flame contained wisps of poison, which was the poisonous flame of the earth drawn from the depths of an underground cave. Wu Qi nodded his head inwardly, thinking that this was a pretty good formation. It had the means to imprison people, the murderous intent of the flying swords, and the heavenly lightning and earthly fire to prevent people from escaping. If there was a powerful magical artifact guarding the eye of the formation, no heaven immortal below the 30th tier would be able to escape, and even if a mid-tier heaven immortal could break it, it would take him some effort. However, in front of Wu Qi, who was an expert in all kinds of formations, the defensive formation in the back mountain of Qing City was really not strong enough. His divine sense swept across the vast back mountain of Qing City, locking onto all the Taoists and monks, as well as the cultivators who were cultivating in seclusion in the cave abodes and secret caves. Wu Qi did not want to waste time talking to these cultivators. The blood centipede sword had already transformed into countless blood threads and shot out into the air. Each of the blood threads was several miles long and more than 100 times thinner than a strand of hair. The blood threads leaped up and down like the wind, easily tearing through cloud flags, flying swords, and even mountains in their path. The cultivators who were looking at Wu Qi from the mountains near and far were horrified. One by one, they summoned their flying swords and magical artifacts to meet the blood threads pressing down on them. But the blood centipede sword was an innate spirit artifact, and it was extremely powerful. How could these acquired magical artifacts resist it? The flying swords and magical artifacts were shattered, and the bodies and souls of the monks and Taoists were shattered as well. These cultivators from the back mountain of Qing City only had 3 to 5 inferior-grade magical artifacts, so they were no match for the blood centipede sword. From the moment Wu Qi threw out the blood centipede sword to the moment he killed all the cultivators around him, it had taken him no more than a deep breath. The strongest among the thousands of cultivators were peak-level nascent soul cultivators, and the weakest were only at the early stage of the Khanate realm. They had thought they would be able to see a good show of exorcism, but little did they expect that Wu Qi, the fiend, would easily send them all to their souls. A furious roar came from the mountainside of a distant mountain. Namo Amitba! How dare you, evil creature! Wu Qi laughed and cried out in a deep voice, Namo Amitba? Which Buddha is that? Amitba? He, is that one of the incarnations of Lord Buddha in the mortal world? As he roared, Wu Qi pointed a finger out. Countless blood threads merged into one, transforming into a blood-red centipede that was several miles long and covered in bright scales. Then, it shot toward the mountain. With a flash of blood, the mountain was torn to pieces by the centipede's sharp claws and fangs. 3 red-robed old monks, who had just transformed into a beam of Buddhist light and flew up from the mountainside with their relics on top of their heads, howled miserably. Their bodies were devoured by the centipede, and the relics on top of their heads were about to fly away, but they were also smashed to pieces by a few beams of blood. Their flesh and energy essence were forcibly absorbed by the blood centipede sword, turning into tiny specks of dust that drifted down from the sky. Cries of alarm came from the distant horizon. In that direction were 7 old Taoists in lavender Taoist robes, whom Wu Qi had long since locked onto with his divine sense. Like the 3 old monks who had flown out, these 7 old Taoists were all in the realm of nascent divinity. In a mortal world like Earth, which was specially used to raise humans, the realm of nascent divinity was already the strongest cultivation base a cultivator could possess. These cultivators who were taken to the Tao League and the Buddhist League were all very talented, or perhaps they were devout believers in their previous lives. That was why they had the fortune to set foot on the path of cultivation in this life. When they cultivated to the peak stage of the nascent divinity realm, they would face their first heavenly tribulation as heaven immortals. Once they successfully passed the tribulation, they would leave the mortal world and ascend to the celestial court or the pure land of the Buddhist League. This kind of ascension was the kind of ascension that the people in the mortal world were familiar with. All the cultivators who had transcended the heavenly tribulation would be forcibly taken to the celestial court or the pure land of the Buddhist League, where they would become the immortal officials of the celestial court and the guardians of the Buddhist League. The itinerant cultivators in the outer heavenly realms still had a choice. They could choose whether to serve the celestial court or the Buddhist League, but the cultivators in the mortal world did not even have the chance to choose. They had to become low-grade existences under the command of the celestial court or the Buddhist League. Wu Qi snorted coldly and pointed a finger out. The blood centipede sword turned into a blood-red beam and shot whistling through the air, slashing toward the 7 old Taoists. The 7 old Taoists snorted coldly in unison. With a wave of their hands, a dozen dazzling magical treasures flew up and flew toward the blood centipede sword. The grade of these magical treasures was very good. 90% of them were upper-grade magical treasures, and 3 of them were lower-grade spirit artifacts. But the blood centipede sword was an innate spirit artifact that surpassed gold immortal artifacts, and could fight against primordial artifacts. With a gentle twist of the blood-red beam, the dozen magical treasures were crushed to pieces. With a thought in Wu Qi's mind, the blood-red beam circled around the 7 old Taoists and cut their fleshly bodies in two. The 7 old Taoists cried out in pain as their foreheads exploded, and their bloody nascent divinities were about to flee with mystic arts. But when facing Wu Qi, a gold immortal, these nascent divinity cultivators were like paralyzed toddlers trying to escape from a black hole. It was simply impossible. Wu Qi clenched his fist, and the void suddenly closed inwardly. A tremendous pressure came crashing down, and the old Taoists' nascent divinities were crushed to pieces by the collapsing space before they could even let out a scream. "Why aren't you coming out to see me, Taoist Miao Yun? How long are you going to hide in that underground cave?" Wu Qi's soft cry turned into a thunderclap and exploded in the ears of Taoist Miao Yun, who was hiding under a mountain. The deafening sound shook him so much that blood spurted out of his 7 orifices and he shrieked miserably. At the same time, the mountain above him exploded into countless pieces of rubble that sprayed in all directions, revealing the underground cave where Taoist Miao Yun had been cultivating in seclusion. Clutching his ears with both hands, Taoist Miao Yun fell to the ground and twitched. Suddenly, a spirit talisman floated up from his body. The talisman, stained with his blood, flickered and burned in the wind, then turned into a jade rui scepter and flew straight up into the sky, disappearing in the blink of an eye. Before Wu Qi could react, lightning flashed and thunder rumbled in the sky, and a colorful aurora suddenly appeared over Mount Green City. The aurora, which could only appear in the polar regions, had actually appeared over Mount Green City. Countless tourists in the front of the mountain burst into loud cheers. The aurora was magnificent and ever-changing, and the colorful glow enveloped the back of Mount Green City in an instant. A bright light, invisible to the naked eyes of mortals, flashed in the aurora, and 3 immortals clad in dark purple Taoist robes rushed out of it. "How dare you intrude into the mortal world and stir up trouble? The immortal monarch has given the order that you will die today." The 3 immortals, who were at the peak of the first tier of heaven immortal realm and only 1 step away from becoming a gold immortal, raised their hands. 3 crimson flying swords shrouded in raging flames transformed into 10 miles long fiery dragons that slashed down towards Wu Qi's head. A deep Buddhist chant rang out as 3 arhats strode out of another bright light and cried out in a deep voice, "By the decree of the Bodhisattva of wisdom and wisdom, Miao-ing, Miao-ing, wisdom and wisdom of the world. What are you waiting for?" The 3 arhats raised their hands as well. 3 Vajra scepters transformed into a Vajra pagoda that stood 10 miles tall and smashed down towards Wu Qi. The flying swords and the pagoda glowed brilliantly as a mighty pressure swept out in all directions, causing the peaks of the back of Mount Green City to crumble. How could the mountains of the mortal world withstand the destructive aura of peak-level heaven immortals and golden arhats? Wu Qi grinned and gently stamped his foot. An invisible force pierced through the ground and killed the howling Taoist Miao Yuan and all the cultivators in the back of Mount Green City. The 3 heaven immortals and 3 arhats who descended from the mortal world flew into a rage. They shook their weapons and charged at Wu Qi with all their might. Chapter 769. 3 peak-level heaven immortals. 3 peak-level arhats. 3 flaming flying swords. 3 golden pagodas. A golden light towered into the sky. Wu Qi smiled as he looked at the tide-like attacks coming at him from the golden light. With hands clasped behind his back, his eyes shone brightly as he fixed his eyes on the 3 golden arhats who were swooping down at him. Shrouded in the 9th heaven Bingding pure yang true flame, the flying swords that could melt gold and iron and destroy all evils, the flying swords hacked heavily at Wu Qi's head. Amidst the jarring sound of collision, not even a single strand of Wu Qi's hair was broken. On the contrary, fist-sized nicks were left on the 3 flying swords by his head, and cracks as dense as spider webs covered the dazzling bodies of the swords. The 3 swords forged by the Grandmaster craftsmen of the Celestial Court were shattered, and the 3 heaven immortals, who were performing incantation gestures and chanting spells to attack Wu Qi with immortal spells, coughed up blood and retreated. The immortal swords they cultivated with their lives were destroyed, and their nascent divinities were shaken as well. The powerful immortal spells they had been preparing to unleash suddenly lost control and backfired. It was as if they had been struck head-on by the immortal spells they had unleashed with all their strength, and the impact had left cracks in their internal organs. Amidst the cries of alarm, the golden pagodas transformed from the 3 Vajra scepters smashed down toward Wu Qi's head with the force of Mount Tai. Wu Qi remained motionless, letting the pagodas hit his head one after another. Amidst a deafening rumble, sparks flew out from Wu Qi's scalp, and the golden pagodas shattered, turning into countless pieces of pure gold that shot out in all directions. The force of the pagodas hitting Wu Qi was hundreds of millions of kilograms, but when they smashed into Wu Qi's head, the force that came out from under Wu Qi's scalp was 1,000 times that of the pagodas. These pagodas couldn't bear the counterforce of hundreds of billions of kilograms. The pure and brutal physical force shattered the pagodas into pieces, and the 3 great Buddhist treasures immediately turned into broken trashes. The arhats roared furiously as they leaped to Wu Qi's side, swinging their fists at him in the shape of dragons and tigers. Their fists were like dragons, and their roars were like tigers. The 3 golden arhats were all at the peak of the arhat realm, and they were only half a step away from the realm of Bodhisattva. The golden arhat body that they had tempered had the power to move mountains and drain the seas. With a gentle shake, they could shake the stars. Now that the 3 of them were attacking Wu Qi with all their might, they were confident that their fists could penetrate Wu Qi's body. Wu Qi allowed their fists to land on his body. He didn't even activate his magic power to defend his body. He just took a slight breath, and the muscles on his body caved inwards before suddenly bouncing outwards. The 3 great arhats howled miserably. Their fists fell on Wu Qi's body, but Wu Qi's muscles caved inwards, and their fists, which contained infinite power, missed. Then Wu Qi's muscles bounced back, and a counterforce that was 10,000 times stronger than the force of their fists swept back like a raging wave. The arhats only felt a sharp pain coming from their fists, followed by their arms, shoulders, and then their whole bodies. After spending countless reincarnations, spending countless generations in the mortal world, accumulating an unknown amount of virtues, and exchanging an unknown amount of power of faith, the supreme-grade golden body of Arhat that he had finally formed shattered like a pile of sand. Countless golden powders scattered in all directions, then were sucked into his stomach. The true fire of life burned fiercely inside Wu Qi's body, and with a roll of chaotic energy, the 3 golden arhats turned into pure heat that circulated throughout his body, making his body a little stronger. Not bad at all. Wu Qi praised delightfully. Finally, both of his hands began to move. His right hand swung out like lightning, and the 9 fist-sized, sparkling and translucent white sariras were lightly flicked by him. The true souls of the arhats in the relics were shattered by him, and the relics, which contained a very strong spiritual sense and mind power, were casually swallowed by him. The chaotic energy wrapped around the swallowed relics and quickly digested them into a rolling heat flow that rushed straight into his spiritual sea. Wu Qi's spiritual soul lit up, and his spiritual sense became a little stronger. The shattered fragments of the true souls of the arhats were sucked into Wu Qi's spiritual soul, and the memories of the 3 arhats were quickly absorbed by him. Those miscellaneous life experiences were discarded by Wu Qi, and he focused on the cultivation method of the three treasures almighty salvation scripture that the three arhats practiced. The 9 chapters of the three treasures almighty salvation scripture could allow an ordinary mortal to cultivate to the level of a 15th tier gold immortal. If he wanted to develop to a higher realm, he would need the following scriptures and mystic arts. The inheritance these three arhats received was not complete, but they were only top-level arhats now, and had not yet stepped into the realm of gold immortals. Yet, they already had the mystic arts that could allow them to cultivate to the level of a 15th tier gold immortal. After defeating the 3 great arhats with ease, Wu Qi grinned at the heaven immortals in the distance, their faces pale. "Since you're here, don't leave." With a wild laugh, a strong gust of wind behind Wu Qi quickly condensed into a green hurricane. Activating the wind-controlling technique of the Song of Gale, the gust of wind transformed into 3 palm-sized green wind blades that whistled toward the chests of the 3 heaven immortals. The Song of Gale came from the inheritance of Reverend Gale, an almighty expert who cultivated to the realm of primordial with his own strength. So, how could the cultivation technique he inherited be trivial? The peak-level heaven immortals could not fight back against the wind blades unleashed by Wu Qi. They could only watch helplessly as the wind blades came right in front of them, and 3 golden arrows of blood shot up into the sky. Wu Qi had killed the heaven immortals with just 1 strike. Like a bolt of lightning, Wu Qi plunged into the bodies of the heaven immortals, whose glabella was split open. Then he ripped off the storage rings on their fingers and used his divine sense to forcibly break the defensive restrictive spells on the rings. "Poor bastards," cursed Wu Qi in exasperation. When he saw that the flying swords unleashed by the 3 heaven immortals were very powerful and of the grade of a top-grade heaven immortal artifact, Wu Qi thought the 3 heaven immortals must be very rich. To his surprise, their storage rings were empty, with only a few dozen mid-grade immortal stones and a few bottles of life-saving immortal pills. There was not even a single upper-grade immortal stone. Instead, there was a golden scroll in each of their rings, on which were promissory notes written by the 3 poor heaven immortals. Wu Qi did not know whether to laugh or cry when he read the promissory notes with his divine sense. It turned out that in order to craft the 3 mighty immortal swords, the 3 of them had pooled together all their belongings, but they still did not have enough materials. Therefore, they had borrowed a lot of materials from the heaven's master blacksmith, Ganjiang, to craft the swords. Ganjiang? Ganjiang is actually a master blacksmith of the celestial court? Wu Qi raised his eyebrows and laughed in a low voice. "Well, you're out of luck for lending money to these 3 poor bastards, and so am I. You can't get back at me for this." With a wry smile, Wu Qi put away the 3 immortal artifact-grade storage rings and crushed the promissory notes into pieces. Only now did he realize that the immortals of the Celestial Court could only use the various immortal artifacts provided by the Celestial Court. If they wanted powerful immortal swords, they would have to spend a huge amount of materials to customize them from the master blacksmith of the Celestial Court. It showed that the Celestial Court was not a paradise. At least, there were some poor bastards in the Celestial Court who owed huge debts. Grinning coldly, Wu Qi glanced at the back mountain of Green City, which had been turned into a pile of rubble by his brief battle with the heaven immortals and arhats. Shaking his head indifferently, he spun, transformed into a wisp of white smoke, and flew toward the Arctic. He had killed Taoist Miao Yun, Shangguan Yi, and all the cultivators of Green City behind him, and wiped out all his old friends in the underhand sect. He no longer had anything to do with Earth. It was time for him to return to Panga Continent and focus on his own plans. The past was over. Now, his friends, his lover, and everything he had were all on Panga Continent. That was his foundation. Taoist Miao Yun, who was once so powerful that even Wu Qi and others could not resist him, was now crushed to death by Wu Qi like an ant. Looking back on his encounters over the years, Wu Qi felt that life was like a dream, and it was really incredible. It was a gold immortal fruit that could not be attained by a proper cultivator even after spending several eons, yet it had fallen into his hands so easily. The fate of the heaven and earth was ever-changing, and it was truly terrifying and lamentable. As he sighed with emotion, Wu Qi felt that his heart was extraordinarily clear and bright. His state of mind, which was a little erratic, had become as bright as a Vajra relic, and had become extremely hard. No external object could ever shake his state of mind. Flying under the blue sky and white clouds, over the blue sea, with the wind whistling past his ears, Wu Qi felt refreshed and calm. He had never been in such a good state. He flew slowly approaching the Arctic Circle. The teleportation formation he had used to come here was at the South Pole, but Wu Qi did not plan to use it. It was his instinct, and an excellent thief would never use the same route. More than 100 kilometers away from the North Pole, Wu Qi stopped over a thick layer of ice. Wu Qi nodded with satisfaction when his divine will penetrated the thick layer of ice and found nothing unusual. It was the effect of the magical restrictive spell laid out by Prince Chongqing and others. The spell was inherited from an ancient god who served the Yellow Emperor, Xinyuan. His special ability was to fuse all things with the heaven and earth, completely erasing the energy fluctuations of these objects. Unless there was a special incantation, outsiders would not be able to find the hidden items. The teleportation formation at the North Pole was hidden with such a spell. Wu Qi glanced around and softly recited a spell. As Wu Qi recited the spell, a tiny gap silently opened up in the layer of ice below, from which a faint energy fluctuation sprayed out. The teleportation formation was right below, and as Wu Qi recited the spell, it was automatically calibrating its coordinates and locking onto the direction of Pangu Continent. Just as Wu Qi was about to sneak into the ice and return to Pangu Continent, a fat figure quietly emerged from behind him. "Little benefactor, you are fated to meet the Buddhist League." The fat monk, with a smile on his face, casually pressed his palm against Wu Qi's back. A tremor ran through Wu Qi as an extremely pure and blazing Buddhist energy rushed into his body, shattering his internal organs in an instant. The monk chuckled and said in a low voice, "I am Buddha Futsu, the one who presides over the 840 million mortal worlds under the decree of the Lord Buddha. Little benefactor, you have killed 3 of my arhats, so you are fated to meet the Buddhist League." The smile on Buddha Futsu's face was amiable, but his attacks were like a storm. 18 palm strikes landed all over Wu Qi's body, causing his bones to creak and his body to plunge into the ice like a meteor. A deafening rumble rang out, and with Wu Qi at the center, the entire North Pole disintegrated. The ancient Xianbing cracked, sending huge icebergs flying into the sky. Waves around the North Pole rose tens of miles high, and the whole Earth trembled slightly because of the blow. Chapter 770. All his internal organs had ruptured, but he did not suffer too much pain. When Wu Qi was smashed into the ice, he had spread out the chaotic energy in his body. His internal organs had turned into a vast and pure chaotic energy that circulated through his body. At the same time, the bloodline of the divine beast, the ancient black water true ape, was stimulated, and his body was quickly transforming into that of a true ape. His internal organs, muscles, bones, and even blood vessels and meridians were rapidly transformed. All the structures in his body were turned into chaotic energy, and then reformed into body tissues that were completely different from those of a human body. The divine beast transformation of the 7 foundation elevating technique had given him an incredible tolerance to all kinds of injuries. As long as the chaotic energy in his body was not depleted, and as long as he could still exercise the mystic art, any injury would be healed by the subsequent transformation, as long as he exercised the divine ability. The collapsed iceberg submerged Wu Qi's body, which had suddenly grown to hundreds of feet tall. Seawater rose into the sky and splashed onto Wu Qi's huge, black ape body, and an endless power came from the seawater. The ancient black water true ape, like the legendary water god Gonggong, was a divine beast born from the first wisp of innate true water aura. It was born with the innate divine ability to control all the water energy in the world, and was said to be a fearsome divine beast that could never be defeated as long as there was a water source nearby. But this was the North Pole of the Earth. Beneath the thick ice was endless seawater. An enormous amount of water element energy rushed into Wu Qi's body while cheering. Underneath the several tens of feet long and thick black hair, his sturdy muscles were bulging. Every single muscle was roaring like a raging dragon, and the muscle fibers were twitching violently, producing loud noises that sounded like the explosion of a cannonball. Through the thick ice and seawater, Wu Qi's scarlet eyes stared fixedly at the chubby Buddha Futu, who was wearing a big smile on his face. A sneak attack from behind? How could a mighty Buddha launch a sneak attack from behind? If the Buddha could kill Wu Qi, he would have nothing to complain about. However, the sneak attack from behind by a mighty Buddha had only cost Wu Qi a little bit of his chaotic energy. This was too humiliating. Moreover, as the endless water energy kept pouring into his body, Wu Qi was rapidly transforming it into chaotic energy. With the Blackwater True Ape's control over water energy, the water energy pouring into his body was thousands of times faster than Wu Qi could absorb it himself. As a result, the little bit of chaotic energy he had just lost had long been replenished. The 7 foundation elevating technique was truly marvelous. Wu Qi laughed soundlessly. Hovering over him, the poor Buddha Futu pretended to put his palms together and chanted a Buddhist mantra. Merciful Buddha, have mercy. You also annihilated the descendants of Qingqing. This is a crime worthy of 10,000 deaths. Forget it, forget it. This penniless monk will send you to the afterlife and let your soul dissipate, completely eliminating the suffering of the mortal world. Buddha Futu pressed his right palm forward, and a white lotus flower bloomed in his palm, from which a 33-storied golden pagoda slowly shot out of the lotus flower. As soon as the pagoda touched the wind, it grew thousands of feet tall and radiated a dazzling golden light. Every inch of the pagoda was carved with the true forms of countless Buddhas, Bodhisattvas, Arhats, Vajras, and many other saints of the Buddhist League. Pure and powerful Buddhist energy was producing deep rumbles that sounded like a tsunami. The pagoda was Buddha Futu's true form, a pagoda discovered by the Lord Buddha in the chaos, and had accompanied him when he was still a golden Arhat. From an Arhat to a Bodhisattva, and from a Bodhisattva to a Buddha, he had gone through countless tribulations and finally stepped onto the throne of the Lord Buddha, becoming the supreme leader of the billions of Buddhas in the universe. Buddha Futu had been protecting Amitabha throughout the immeasurable eons. Therefore, after Amitabha became the Lord Buddha, he did not hesitate to use his blood essence to transform the pagoda, allowing Buddha Futu to transform into a human and become a Buddha. Then, he asked him to guard the mortal world, the foundation of the Buddhist League. Buddha Futu had accompanied Amitabha for countless eons, and was his absolute confidant. Therefore, he was the most suitable person to guard the mortal world. It was also because Buddha Futu had cultivated his Buddha body from a pagoda that he was not as particular as other Buddhas, and his means of doing things were no different from those of demons. He only cared about the result in everything he did, and that was why he sneaked up on Wu Qi from behind. As soon as the pagoda appeared, a terrible Buddhist energy transformed into a golden torrent and pressed down on Wu Qi's head. A pleased smile came over Buddha Futu's face. In his opinion, anyone who dared to infringe on the interests of the Buddhist League was an evildoer, a vile spawn. Be it a evildoer or a vile spawn, there was no need for such things to exist, as they could just be killed. Therefore, other Buddhas of the Buddhist League would often use their mighty divine abilities to subdue some unusual demons and make them their guardians. But Buddha Futu had never had any unusual demons serving him. As the Buddhist energy came whistling down, Wu Qi let out a wild laugh. His huge body, shrouded in water energy that looked like black dragons, tore through the ice and flew up into the sky. The Blackwater True Ape, who had grown to about 10,000 feet tall, threw his head back and let out a furious roar. Countless bodies of water on Earth responded with a deafening roar, and an immeasurable amount of water energy transformed into numerous dragons that streaked across the void and pounced toward Wu Qi. With 2 streams of water energy in his hands, each hundreds of feet thick and 100 miles long, as if he were holding 2 giant dragons, Wu Qi grinned hideously at the dumbfounded Buddha Futu, then waved a stream of dark water energy backhandedly and smashed it toward the golden Buddha's power that was pressing down from above. A deafening boom rang out, and the purest innate water energy held the golden Buddhist power firmly in midair. No matter how hard Buddha Futu exercised his divine abilities and mystic arts, and the golden torrent kept tearing through the black water vapor, the water element was soft. No matter how many layers of water vapor were destroyed, there was still an endless supply of water vapor, so Wu Qi was not afraid of Buddha Futu's war of attrition. Then, Wu Qi waved his other hand, and the 100-mile-long black dragon let out a deafening roar of rolling waves. Amidst the roar, a dark shadow flashed past, and Wu Qi's heavy blow landed on Buddha Futu's chest. A deafening rumble rang out. Buddha Futu's kasaya emitted 7 layers of light to protect his body, and a vast amount of water vapor exploded in front of his chest. Buddha Futu was knocked hundreds of miles away, but he was not injured at all. Buddha Futu was Amitabha's absolute confidant, and the kasaya he wore had an extraordinary origin. Amitabha had personally asked the current great celestial emperor of the celestial court, who had ordered countless immortals under the jurisdiction of the celestial court to gather the clouds and all kinds of innate energies into thin threads, which were then jointly made by the experts of artifact refinement from the Tao League and the Buddhist League. The seemingly ordinary kasaya was inlaid with a total of 49,000 mysterious pearls, and its various restrictive spells were extremely powerful. With this kasaya on, Buddha Futu could escape unscathed even if he was attacked by more than 10 opponents of the same cultivation base. With a strange laugh, Wu Qi sprung up and chased after Buddha Futu. The ocean was full of water vapor, and the black water true ape was a divine beast born to control water. With the help of the water element, Wu Qi's speed was so fast that it was impossible to catch him. In just a blink of an eye, he had come behind Buddha Futu, raised his huge fist, and smashed it at the latter with all his strength. It was a well-known fact to all cultivators under the heaven that dragons had strong fleshly bodies. However, in this world, there were many divine beasts that possessed innate divine powers that were several times stronger than the dragon race. For example, the Blackwater True Ape was one such innate divine beast. An adult Blackwater True Ape could easily suppress a true dragon that had a higher cultivation base than itself with brute force. For the Blackwater True Ape, the so-called divine abilities of shifting the stars were as easy as eating and breathing. Deafening rumbles kept coming from the sky. Wu Qi's fist landed on Buddha Futu, sending him flying forward. Then, with a sway of his body, he came in front of Buddha Futu and punched him again, sending him flying backward. After throwing thousands of punches in a row, Buddha Futu's kasaya kept bursting with dazzling light. Several layers of protective light were shattered by Wu Qi, but his body did not fly more than a mile away. Wu Qi's speed was frighteningly fast. No matter where Buddha Futu was sent flying, he would rush to his side and punch him back. Buddha Futu was battered by Wu Qi's heavy fists. He cried out and tried to recite a spell or perform an incantation gesture to teach Wu Qi a lesson, but every time, his dharma was broken by Wu Qi's heavy punches. The poor Buddha Futu had a very high status in the Buddhist League. Ever since he was transformed into a human by Amitabha, he had never experienced such a fierce fight. Although he had the experience of subduing demons and devils, he only relied on his cultivation base of a Buddha to bully some little demons and devils who were not even heaven immortals. In terms of combat experience, Buddha Futu was like a blank sheet of paper. So, he was so flustered by Wu Qi's random punches that his mind went blank, and he even forgot how to fight back. He even forgot that his true form was a pagoda. If he had remembered this and summoned his true form, with the pagoda's incredible defense, how could Wu Qi get close to him? The aggrieved Buddha Futu was beaten by Wu Qi for a full quarter of an hour, until he was dizzy and forgot where he was. Fortunately, the kasaya he was wearing had an amazing defense. No matter how many punches Wu Qi threw at him with all his might, none of them could touch his skin. Just as Buddha Futu was hesitating whether to ask his master, Amitabha, for help, Wu Qi opened his mouth and spat out the natural phenomena medallion. A gust of wind mixed with countless heavenly thunders and earthly fires roared out of the small jade medallion, sweeping Buddha Fudu into it in a flash. Terrible explosions kept ringing out. The Natural Phenomena Medallion was a powerful magical artifact crafted by the ancient sacred Emperor Zhuanshu himself, and its wind, fire, and thunderbolts were all made from the purest innate energy source. As soon as the gust of wind, heavenly thunders, and earthly fires hit the Kasaya, 6 of the 7 layers of light on it were shattered. Before Buddha Fuda could react, a plume of dark smoke rushed out of the top of Wu Qi's head. The dark Een celestial tower whistled and poured down a great sheet of starlight, slowing down the flow of time around Buddha Fudu by 100 times. Buddha Fudu's body stiffened, and he froze to the spot. Meanwhile, the blood centipede sword had already slashed at his waist with a sharp blood-red beam. With a crisp crack, the last layer of light on Buddha Fudu's Kasaya shattered, and the blood centipede sword tore through his body and cut him in half. Amidst a miserable howl, Buddha Fudu's upper body transformed into a beam of golden light and flew back into the pagoda. Wu Qi threw his head back and roared, then opened his mouth and swallowed the lower half of his body, which had turned into golden liquid. The pagoda flew whistling into the void and disappeared, while Wu Qi hurriedly flashed into the teleportation formation under the North Pole. The formation flickered with a bright light, and in the blink of an eye, Wu Qi vanished without a trace. You're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.